Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston with presentations from prominent industry vendors, Solutions Review presents Data Demo Day, a virtual trade show for data management and analytics.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to Data Demo Day. Over the next 3 hours, we'll be taking an inside look at 3 of the top data technologies available today. And we have assembled an interestingly diverse lineup for you. 3 solutions, each offering a different and compelling value proposition across data collaboration, data integration, and data analytics. First up is Atlan. Atlan is a modern data collaboration workspace along the lines of GitHub. It acts as a virtual hub for data assets, ranging from tables and dashboards to models and code. Atlan has been recognized as a Gartner Cool vendor in the inaugural report on data ops, and is a solution you should have on your radar as you continue to evolve your data teams. And joining us today from New York is the head of North America at Atlan, Andrew Ermogenous. Andrew, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Excited to share more about who we are, what we do, and how we can help data practitioners.
Well, I couldn't be happier that Atlan is leading off, and you in particular presenting, because as we've gotten to know each other over the last little bit, I've really been impressed with your background, and you've only been really at Atlan for a little over a year. But tell us a little bit more about where you're coming from and how you wound up at Atlan, and a little bit of what you think is the opportunity there before you dive into the demo.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent my entire career in enterprise tech go-to-market, starting at Oracle, right? Fortune 500, big corporate legacy infrastructure on-prem, and saw the entire life cycle all the way through to modern cloud-native solutions. So from Oracle, I did the polar opposite, went to an early stage machine learning startup, got a sense of the Hadoop era, big data, and everything therein. And then subsequently worked at an organization called CoreOS, which was a cloud-native Kubernetes orchestration platform. So really like deep enterprise IT. And so throughout that process, I kind of saw like legacy on-prem, big data, modern cloud infrastructure. And most recently, I started Real Factors, which was an embedded analytics platform for real estate investors. And the reason that I came to Atlan was because at my startup, I consistently felt the pain points and challenges that data practitioners felt with dashboards breaking or a lack of context on certain things. So as an example, I remember a customer called us, our dashboard broke and had no visibility as to why. And so I looped in our data scientists, I looped in our data engineering team, and ultimately, it took us kind of hours, multiple Zoom calls, et cetera, to try and solve that. And so, I joined Atlan last year to head up North America here. It's kind of a loose title because I was the only person in North America. But since then, we've significantly grown the team here across go-to-market, customer success, account management, support, sales, solutions engineering, et cetera. And have gone on to bring on customers like Monster, Cars.com, Plaid, WeWork, et cetera. So happy to share a little bit more and talk about the journey that we've had here at Atlan.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and we certainly cover the space extensively. The opportunity is immense, and really what we're seeing is exactly what I think you're going to show, which is innovation happening every year with new solutions coming at this at scale, and I think the best thing for me to do is to take a step back and hand the ball to you and let you go through a little bit more about where Atlan's coming from, and then get into the solution itself. Just in terms of time checks, we're about 5 minutes in. I would say, give you, 35, 40 minutes to kind of walk through all that. And then I'll jump back in. We'll take some questions. I'll have some questions, certainly. And we'll wrap it all up. But otherwise, have at it, and we'll talk to you in a little bit.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And we'll do. So as you alluded to earlier, we're building a home for data teams in the same way that, as you mentioned, GitHub built a home for developers or Salesforce built a home for sales teams. And so in terms of the agenda, I'll plan to talk a little bit about our story and the company itself. I'll then transition to the problems that Atlan is solving for. From there, I'll talk about some product introductions and use cases. I'll transition over to the demo, and then we'll spend, as you alluded to, the last 10 or 15 minutes with more of an open Q&A from the audience. So let's jump into it. So a little bit about the history of Atlan. We actually started as a data team ourselves. We were essentially doing data science for social good with folks like the UN and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we'll see the scale of projects we're working on, like billions of pixels of satellite imagery, sensitive data for hundreds of millions of citizens. We're working on things like healthcare, poverty alleviation. But as we went through that process, internally, every day was chaos. And it's for some of the reasons that you see here on the screen. Whether it's Shilpa trying to make a request for data, or Hana trying to get more context on a column, Rika saying, hey, there's improper governance here. This person shouldn't have access to PII. These were the common and persistent challenges that we felt as a data team. But it's not just the Slack messages. It's the emails, the late night texts, the calls from customers or internal customers, the ad hoc Zooms, the tribal knowledge that's lost if someone leaves the organization, the time it takes to onboard someone. And all these challenges fill into what we call the data collaboration problem. And so it was when we reached this breaking point that we determined that there was a better way. And so that's how Atlan was born. So fast forward several years, we've built the collaborative workspace for modern data-driven teams, backed by some incredible investors. Insight and Sequoia are two legendary venture capital investors with great investments across the data and infrastructure ecosystem. Backed by founders of the modern data stack, whether it's Bob Muglia, Snowflake's first CEO, or the founders of Stitch, as well as recognition by Gartner, data ops, active metadata management, et cetera. So we've built a really powerful team here, going on 100 and look to scale beyond that next year. But most importantly, some incredible customers and incredibly data-driven modern teams, folks like Plaid or Postman, high-growth startups, all the way through to larger enterprise organizations like Juniper and Unilever. So that's a little bit about our story in the company. I wanted to take a quick pause and dive a little bit deeper into the problems that we see with some of our customers and the ways that we help. So something we see significantly, and the reason that data teams come to us is because they've fallen into a service trap. And so what we mean by the service trap is there's these consistent requests that come across. Can I have a dashboard for X, a report for Y, a query for Z? And so what ends up happening is business stakeholders have a requirement. Data teams are rushing to get something done. And it's this never-ending loop. You keep going. You continue to be reactive instead of proactive. And so we believe that this creates a significant challenge for data teams. And so what we're trying to enable with customers here is to essentially shift them to a product mindset. And so what that means is that you treat data not as tables, but each individual data asset as a product within the organization, and something that's reusable by everyone within the organization. And so as you think about some of the fundamental principles for data as a product, first and foremost, as I mentioned, it's reusable, it's reproducible, well documented. Everyone in the organization can enable it, is enabled to use it. And ultimately, what you get is self-service, a reduction in the volume of data team requests, faster onboarding times and enablement for the broader organization. And so as we go through this presentation today, please think about how Atlan can enable you to think of data as a product within your organization. Transitioning over to the Atlan product, as we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, Atlan is a modern collaborative workspace. You could really think of us as the single thread that brings together your entire data team, whether it's someone technical like a data engineer, to a business analyst, all the way through to someone non-technical in the business like sales or finance or retention or whatever business line of business that you serve within the organization. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our principles. First and foremost, discoverable and reusable data assets, going back to that data as a product concept that I just shared. Traditionally, it was only tables. Now we have pipelines, models, DBT models, dashboards, widgets, LookML. And so we want to make each and every component of your data ecosystem its own data asset, and in turn, make it discoverable. So Plaid, as an example, calls us Google search for their entire data ecosystem. Anyone familiar with the e-commerce-like experience should be familiar with this experience of filtering down data assets and finding what you need. Once you've found it, how do you get context on it? And this is where we've introduced the concept of the data asset 360 view, kind of like a customer 360 view on Salesforce. So if you think about it, the analogy is when you have the account view in Salesforce, you know who owns it, the history of it, any context associated with it. Another analogy is like GitHub. When you start as a new engineer, get access to your code, revision history, README. How do you create that same experience for data? So first and foremost, we provide the requisite knowledge of context. So whether it's the owner of this data product, the tag, the classification, the documentation, etc. And then some of the more nuanced things that enable better trust and visibility. So as an example, we'll parse your SQL query history in things like Snowflake or Redshift, and we'll construct lineage down to the column level from the source table in the data warehouse, all the transformations that are happening all the way through to the BI layer. Additionally, we'll layer in some intelligent bots, things like glossary bots, description bots, PII bots, to automate that long tail of documentation. So whether that's auto tagging assets for you, filling in column descriptions, or doing security classifications like PII detection, we'll automate a lot of that documentation and governance that you may want to layer on top of the data asset. Finally, we introduced this concept of embedded collaboration. And one of our fundamental insights as a data team is that it's not just the data ecosystem. It's all the surrounding tools used within the organization that the data ecosystem needs to interact with. So first and foremost, contextual discussions. We have chat built into the Atlan application, but we've also integrated it with things like Slack and Teams so that you could push notifications and alerts down to the systems that end users are using. Maybe in the platform, you want to log a Jira ticket or something in Azure DevOps. We're enabling you to do that. And then finally, we've introduced this concept of reverse metadata, which is pushing metadata from Atlan to another source outside of Atlan, whether that's Looker or Tableau or Power BI, or maybe it's some sort of internal wiki. But we want to make metadata available at the place that end users need it. Finally, just a general product and platform principle, we're open by default. And so whether that's building a plugin marketplace so you can integrate your own data source or collaboration tool, or build your own bot. I talked a little bit about the glossary bot or the PII bot. We're actually opening up the capability to customers to build their own bots as well within Atlan. And finally, an open API. So everything you see in the Atlan UI is powered by an open API. Whether that's push or pull, you can extract metadata from Atlan or push something to Atlan. Maybe you want to bring in metadata from your ETL or an observability tool. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about how customers use us today. So I talked about Plaid. I think data discovery is a fairly straightforward use case. I want to talk about the Postman use case. So Postman, when they first adopted Atlan, they had a variety of different disparate systems. They had sheets, docs, tribal knowledge, wikis. And so they wanted to create a single source of truth for all their enterprise data assets. And so they viewed Atlan as the single place that they could do that. Or maybe a more nuanced use case like CSE Insurance. They're an insurance business. And if you think about the types of data that insurance companies collect, every insurance form you fill out, right, has like 100 fields: policy ID, policy name, last name, et cetera. So they had hundreds of metrics that they were tracking in these outdated spreadsheets. So they now use Atlan as their metrics repo for a way to verify and certify all the different data assets. The glossary terms that they're using within the organization. And then maybe some more holistic use cases. So Unilever, when we started working with them several years ago, they had just rolled out their cloud data lake, and they now needed a way to bring some visibility to how to provide access to the broader sales and marketing orgs. And so data requests were taking a while, like weeks, because there was no real workflow for it. There was no way to connect the data to the approval workflow. And so they now view Atlan as their single layer for approval workflows and accessibility to the data lake, and enable self-serve insights with some of the query capabilities. They've cut down the time to insight, from weeks to days, and in some cases hours with Atlan. Someone like WeWork, maybe a little bit more of a holistic use case. When we first started working with them, they were preparing to go public and they needed some visibility into their public reported KPIs. How are they calculated? Where are they coming from? How are they transformed? What are the dashboards that they're in? And then is there a layer of governance on top of it to ensure that only the right people have access? And so they can run that entire process through Atlan. Final thing I'll just touch on is data governance. A strong component of what we do is providing the right access to the right people at the right time. So Funding Society's Southeast Asia's largest peer-to-peer lender. And so obviously a lot of sensitive data that they're managing. And so we wanted to create an environment for them where they can now manage 50,000 different data assets and all the classifications and tagging. So that's a little bit on the core use cases that customers use Atlan for. So with that, I wanted to transition over to the product demo. And so, at the outset, I talked about this concept of a data product or a data asset. And I talked about how traditionally this was just tables. So in the search here, you'll see that if we type in something like order, we won't just get tables, right? We'll get columns, we'll get terms, queries, dashboards. And so if you can think of, if there's one thing you take away from today, think of it as a unified search for all the different data assets within your ecosystem. But oftentimes you don't necessarily know what you're looking for. And so we'll jump over to the Discover tab. So I talked about kind of an e-commerce-like experience. Anyone that's used Amazon before will have a similar type of experience here. You filter by prime, dollar signs, delivery dates, whatever that may be. How do you create that same experience with data? And so as we go through some of the different use cases within Atlan today, we'll take on the persona of an analyst at a CPG company, one of our customers, Unilever, and some of the typical workflows that they would go through. So let's say it's your first day. Someone says, hey, you're logged into Atlan, you got everything you need. Can you run a quick query for me on the most popular snack orders? And so you log in Atlan, you're trying to figure out what to do. Put simply, you'll probably start by search. And what you'll see here is it's not just tables that you get access to. It's dashboards, it's meta stores, it's databases, it's notebooks. So again, that unified search across your entire data ecosystem. A few different ways that you could potentially filter down. Maybe you're looking for orders data, so you'll filter by the orders tag. Really easy way to filter down from hundreds of results to just a few. You only want verified assets, so that's something that like a data steward would be going through. And finally, it's in Snowflake from context some colleague gave you. So now I was able to filter down all those different results to a single table. What you'll see here to the right is some of the metadata to help preview the asset for you. Like what are the tags associated with it, the classifications, users, owners, experts. This all feeds into the trust component of Atlan. If you see something that's certified, something that people are using frequently, you know that this is in fact something you can trust. So let's drill into the data asset 360 view. And so I mentioned that GitHub analogy earlier. You start as a new engineer, get access to your code, revision history, README. How do you create that same experience for data? This is where we've brought the data itself, along with the README, data dictionary, and some glossary terms, classifications, owners, experts, etc. So we've created that single source of truth for data assets. In turn, each one of these assets is a shareable entity. So I could copy the link. I could push it to something like Slack and say, hey, Mark, here's what you were looking for. And he'll get notified in Slack or Teams or whatever that may be. I can see what the activity history of the asset has been. Or if I know there's an issue, I could go ahead and log a ticket directly. And so this all feeds into that collaboration, embedded collaboration component I talked about earlier. It's not just the data ecosystem, but all the other tools you're using. So what did we just do? We searched for snacks. We filtered down by orders, got to the right data asset. We've gotten a quick sense of the data preview, the documentation, et cetera. This seems to be a data asset that we believe that we could trust. So now we'll go ahead and query it. And I'll get to that in a second, but I just want to highlight kind of how this would have traditionally been done, right? Let's say a business user wanted access to data. They probably typically don't have access to the data warehouse, so they're going to be pinging someone. Then they're going to say, hey, where's the documentation? It might be in a sheet, a shared drive, or someone's head. Maybe they need to hop on a Zoom. So it's this whole commingled, complicated process that we're trying to simplify and enable more self-serve with Atlan. So we'll now go ahead and query the asset itself. So we'll jump over to the query tab. And so we're trying to enable end-to-end exploration from finding the asset all the way to query. If you know SQL directly, great. You can query the asset directly. Or let's say you're like me, you're not technical, you wanted to build your own query. We could actually go ahead and do that here. And so I'll filter by product name, aggregate account of order ID, descending, and then I'll go ahead and run the query. And so now I'm able to self-serve my way to an answer entirely on my own. Don't need interaction with any of the broader team, and I don't even know SQL. I can now go downstream, open it in something like Tableau, download the data, etc. And let's say you want to save this for future use. You could go ahead and do that. And so this is where we're seeing a lot of value add with customers. What we're often seeing is like these kind of constant recurring like requests, like, hey, can you run a query for this? So we can now verify these assets, these query assets, public or private, tag them to a term. Let's say I want to tie it to snacks as an example. Go ahead and save it. And this is now, you'll see I marked it as private. This is also now a searchable query within Atlan. So if I hit Command K for global search, I could search through all the queries related to snacks. Or if I'm on the asset, I could piggyback off of some of the work one of my other colleagues did, as an example. And so driving back to that concept of self-service analytics, we're trying to give end users a bunch of different tools to self-serve or find the right answer. So that was the first use case around data discovery and exploration. I now want to work backwards from a more traditional use case. Let's pretend you got a Slack message and someone says, hey, this dashboard looks off. Can you give me some more context? And so what I want to do is not demo Atlan, but start outside of Atlan. And so this is where that reverse metadata concept starts to come into play. So we talked about making metadata from Atlan available outside of Atlan. And so this is where a Chrome extension comes into play. So if you pull up a dashboard, you can get immediate context on who owns this dashboard, what are the terms associated with it, classifications, and go ahead and open an Atlan if you want. So your colleague says, hey, Jason's prior order looks off. You'll go ahead and explore. So we'll go ahead and open this asset within Atlan. And so what we're taking to is the dashboard asset. And so again, coming back to that concept of the data asset, the dashboard is its own searchable entity within Atlan. It can have that same verification process, owners, experts, tags, et cetera. And this is where lineage would come into play. And so in terms of how we're constructing lineage, it's kind of twofold. So first and foremost, we're looking at your SQL query history in the data warehouse. We're parsing that SQL query history to get a sense of what the transformations that are happening are. And then we'll construct this lineage view. So as an example, if I click this show process button, I can actually click on this gear icon here. Click show raw SQL query. And so I'll see this create statement. So that gives me some visibility into how lineage is being created. All sorts of use cases here in terms of like impact analysis. So let's say I'm at this source table. I want to see what happens if I make a change. I could see all the downstream impacted assets as an example. But coming back to this initial question, right, around lineage. So we talked about how we would parse your SQL query history in Snowflake or any data warehouse. Via the business intelligence metadata API, we're able to construct lineage from the BI layer all the way to the table. So coming back to the original question, your colleague pings you and say, hey, Jason's prior order looks off. Can you look into it? And so now I've gone back to the lineage of that asset. I've seen that this table is what's actually feeding this looker dashboard. And so now I want to navigate over to this table entity. And so for context, we're built on a graph database in the background. Every entity within Atlan is related, so I can navigate directly to this table entity. And so from there, I'll jump into the data profile. And so in terms of what we've done here, we've brought in some data profiling capabilities from the Great Expectations ecosystem, which enables us to run data profiles on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And so now I could get a high level sense of some of the statistics on this individual table, min, max, missing values, et cetera. And so I'll jump over to Jason's prior order and I'll see like my colleague is actually right. It seems like there are in fact missing values. And so as I scroll up though, I'll get the answer to my question, which is it's not a feature, it's a bug. Jason's prior order has missing values if it's the first order of a customer. And so now I was able to, in a completely self-serve way, find the answer to that question. Again, I'll go back to that collaboration plugin. So I'll tag Mark and I'll say, FYI, feature, not a bug. Jason's prior order has missing values if it's the first order of a customer. And so again, going back to how you would have done this traditionally, let's say the dashboard's broken. You're going to look into what the kind of calculated fields are. You're going to try and get sense from the data engineer of what table's feeding the dashboard. They may not know. They may have to do some exploration. They might have to run a script to profile the data to see if there's any anomalies, right? You might hop on a Zoom, right? So it's this whole complicated process. And so we've tried to enable a completely end-to-end self-serve experience so you could go from dashboard to table and troubleshoot a potential issue. So that was the root cause analysis use case, as well as the impact analysis use case, which I talked about, which was working backwards from a dashboard to a table. And so last thing I wanted to touch on here, you all may have noticed this concept of a tag throughout. So we have two tags. We have a classifications tag, and then we have business terms. So every entity in Atlan can be tagged with either one of those items. Business terms is more around business taxonomy or metrics. Classifications are more around, business classifications like sensitive or critical. Maybe it's silver, gold, bronze for levels of the data warehouse, or maybe it's a PII or a GDPR classification. And so I want to jump over to the business glossary. And so we're seeing two use cases for customers here. The first is more of like a business taxonomy. So by department, by SKU, what are all the key business terms that we're seeing? The other is more of a metric store. I'll jump into each of those use cases in a second. But in the same way that data assets can be marked as verified or as owner or given owners or experts, you could do the same thing for glossary terms. So as an example, maybe we will give a description here, we'll certify it, we'll link all the relevant assets as well. So I can start to link different things like anything related to order. Great. The other use case that we're seeing from customers here is more of a metric store. So I'll jump over to churn rate as an example. And so common requests that we see from customers is like, hey, how is daily active users calculated? Or how is recurring revenue calculated? And so this gives us a mechanism to define that in plain English, link all the relevant dashboards, queries, tables, etc. And so anyone in the business, whether it's someone technical or someone on the line of business, they can get a good understanding of how things are defined and who's owning them. I did want to come back to one component here, which was this concept of linked assets. And so this is where a lot of the automation within Atlan starts to come into play. So you could start to link, when you get onboarded with Atlan, you could start to link a variety of different assets, right? Whether it's columns, tables, etc. We actually have bots that are running in the background that will do things like append glossary terms or descriptions. And so as an example, let's say you link the sales tag to a table that has the name snacks in it or orders in it. The bot will start to recognize that over time, and it will start to build on top of Atlan and start to recommend adding glossary terms. The same can be said for descriptions. So let's say you have a column described as user_ID, unique ID of each individual user. What we've now enabled is the bot will start to pick that up over time. And let's say you have 10 other columns that don't have that description, we'll append all those descriptions, and it'll all go through an approval workflow. So as an example, I mentioned, adding a column description. The bot will identify that pattern and start to recommend it. Or maybe let's jump over to another request. So departments as an example. You'll see the bot is starting to recommend adding the departments tag to the department ID. And so this starts to automate the entire flow of classifications, terms, descriptions, etc. This is all driven by a data steward. So we have a variety of different roles within Atlan: admins, cloud, steward, members. But the goal is we can create a level of data stewardship around your data and create a wall between those who have access to approve and those who do not. Each one of those, each user is given a role. And then you can create access policies based on each and every one of those roles. So access policies can be created on something as broad as a database or as narrow as a table or a view. You can tag a classification. We'll jump into classifications in a second. Let's say I want to restrict access to any tables with PII to every group, or actually that's allowed to view. So we want to deny to view and collaborate to any group for anything related to PII. That's something you could do. And you could kind of think of our access policies as something like, Google Docs, view only, view and edit, deny access all around. That's the type of experience that we're trying to enable. In the short-term product roadmap, we're also trying to build, or we have built, it's in beta, this concept of a persona. And so persona takes this a step further, and we'll start to do things like create access policies for marketing data analysts or data engineers on the data platform team or sales users. And so this enables you to create a completely curated experience for end users by team. And so as you start to think about how to onboard and bring folks on, you can create a very specific experience for them, and it's reproducible each and every time. So as you think about creating access policies, that's a place where we could potentially fit in. On that topic, I talked a little bit about classifications and bots. I want to come back to that really quickly. So as an example, we have a bot that will auto detect PII. So when you set a crawler up, it will automatically tag any asset that it deems having PII. So let's say you have like first_name or social security number as a column name. Our bot will pick that up and automatically tag those assets, which can then enable you to tag every asset in your ecosystem and then give complete visibility into all the assets that are tagged as PII. And so as you think about a legal or a compliance use case here, we're seeing a lot of our customers bring in some of those folks into the platform so they can audit anything that exists and who has access, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're also opening up the capability for end users to actually build their own bots. And so I'll transition over to our marketplace, which I talked about earlier, to show you a little bit on that as well. And so essentially, the Atlan platform is built on a flexible architecture. We're opening up the ability for end users to actually build their own bots for whatever it is that they want. So whether it's a GDPR bot, or it could be something like, hey, can you classify every asset in this schema with a certain tag, as an example. And so you can write the bots in any language that you want, Python, et cetera. And then it could do anything from tagging to approval workflows, et cetera. There are really endless capabilities with the bots. We've been using this internally on our end today, and we're opening up this capability to customers as well. The last thing that I wanted to quickly touch on as we go towards kind of the openness of the Atlan platform is the concept of an API. And so I mentioned earlier that everything in the Atlan UI is powered by an open API. So whether it's search or the creation of assets or even lineage, right? So as you all think about this, we've built an open and extensible architecture where if there's something in the Atlan UI that you want to build, like you'll have the capability to do it. And you can also pull out anything that exists in Atlan today. So a good kind of tactical use case for our API, as an example, is jumping over to this concept of business metadata. And so this could be anything from something simple like which team owns this to something more nuanced like creating a custom field called ETL details, which will bring in metadata from your ETL and update your team when the ETL was last ran, as an example. And so this all feeds into this broader concept that we're thinking about called active metadata, which means you can use Atlan as the single source of truth for anything, both push and pull, and use Atlan to drive certain actions. So another tactical example, let's say you want to bring in metadata. You'll see here the business metadata section here has brought in metadata from DBT. So you can give context on DBT models directly within Atlan. So again, a variety of different use cases that you can find within Atlan with business metadata, but just kind of wrapping it up and bringing it all in a bow here. I wanted to talk about a couple of key principles that drive us as a company, and kind of open it up to questions in a moment here. I talked about open by default. That's a primary principle that drives the Atlan platform here. The second is pay as you go. And so traditionally in this space, you had multi-year, multi-million-dollar, six-figure contracts, took too long to get up and running, complicated, required IT involvement. So we have a very simple model, time to value in days, not months or quarters. But more importantly, pay as you go. So an adoption-based model where you can grow as we start to provide value. Related to that is this concept of automate wherever possible. We want to get you up and running quickly, whether that's from an integrations perspective or with respect to some of the bots that I just outlined. And then finally, design first. So in the same way that you don't need a training manual for Uber, we don't anticipate you needing a training manual for Atlan. We tried to make it as intuitive as possible with the business user in mind. And so if I could leave you all with one thing to think about here or to take away, we were a data team ourselves, as we mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. We wanted to build a company that we would have wanted to partner with ourselves as a data team. So company built for data teams by a data team. So with that, I will open it up to questions from the audience here.
That was great. Thanks for that. I wanted to, we've got a few questions that I want to get to, but I want to start where you just ended, because I think this is kind of an interesting point. You guys actually have a data ops culture code on your website, which kind of gets to this idea of approaching this problem with kind of a larger mindset. Can you talk a little bit about a little bit more about that last bit and this idea of a data ops culture code and kind of how you're trying to provide this value through that framework?
I think it comes back to that concept of treating data as a product, which I mentioned earlier. And so as you think about like the shift from like IT and operations to more of like a DevOps culture, the enterprise IT space. I think we're trying to take that same approach to data as well. And so instead of these like long kind of sprints, take an agile mindset and approach as you build data products, and take that kind of DevOps mindset and apply it to data. Create kind of reusable products that everyone can use, that doesn't require a lot of provisioning or complicated data engineering work. I think ultimately, like if I could just boil it down to one single thing, it's like reusable, reproducible assets. And that's kind of the mindset shift that we're trying to approach is, software has been treated as a product with a product manager. Like you should do the same thing with data. Like we believe that you should have a data product manager, as an example.
Well, so I know you, I was writing down some of the most salient points for me anyway. The automation being one of them, certainly the collaboration, the data discovery, and an open API. But I wanted to allow you to kind of dial in specifically on a couple of differentiators. This is a very rapidly growing space, and there's a lot of solutions, and we're seeing a lot of solutions. Talk a little bit about what differentiates Atlan from the broader market.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to come back to our history as a data team, because ultimately we felt the pain points intimately that each one of our customers are feeling on a day-to-day basis. And Atlan was actually our fourth try at building a data catalog. We tried 3 different times and failed. And eventually we started this project called the assembly line, and which was meant to help enable us build our own kind of data catalog. We tried buying a bunch of different solutions, and ultimately we tried to stitch together a bunch of different tools, and they didn't really answer the questions that we needed them to do. And they only gave us like 50% of the features and functionality. And I kind of alluded to it, right? They were like IT centric, took long to get up and running, expensive on-prem. We wanted a cloud native, business user friendly solution. And so as you think about the broader context of the market, traditionally this was called the data catalog market, right? Gartner had their data catalog quadrant, et cetera, or metadata management catalog, excuse me. They've scrapped that, and it's now called active metadata. And so ultimately, we believe our major value prop as a differentiator, or our major value prop and our differentiator is the fact that we have created not just a data catalog, but an active metadata platform. And so I think catalogs are static, dynamic. We want to build something that's dynamic and real time. And I'll skip ahead for a quick second. So a couple of the pillars, right? Traditionally, it was like manual, human-led. There's really a one-size-fits-all approach for data stewards. We've tried to build in this concept of automation and bots into the ecosystem, and that will grow over time. Additionally, there were a bunch of different piecemeal solutions that you needed to buy, maybe some partnerships. But we've created this 360 view, just like GitHub, just like Salesforce, that kind of single source of truth for every and all things data. Additionally, we live in a modern world, right? And so the historical tools were built for IT, not really a business-facing UI. So we tried to embed collaboration throughout in every piece of the platform. Starts with things like Jira and Slack, but the possibilities are endless. Whether it's project management tools like Asana or maybe email. There's so many different opportunities to build in collaboration into the platform, and especially in this remote world that we're now in, where you can't just turn to your colleague and say, hey, quick question. We believe this is especially important. And the final thing is open by default. Traditionally solutions were closed, proprietary. Everything in our platform is open. The platform, the bot ecosystem, APIs. One of our kind of fundamental insights is that the data ecosystem is ever evolving and ever changing. You look 5 years ago, Snowflake was not that popular, and today it's the de facto cloud data warehouse. And so we want to enable you to grow with you and change as your team and tooling changes, and then also build on top of the Atlan platform as well. And then ultimately we could drive kind of what you see here, which is what we call the metadata lake. So a single layer to drive every interaction and action within your data ecosystem. And it's kind of funny, like if you think of all the other analogies, right? Salesforce for sales teams. There's really no system of record for data teams. And so we believe that 5 years from now, every data team will be operating on a tool like Atlan.
Well, so I want you to put on your client hat. So what you were prior to Atlan. As you know, I'm sure you're talking to prospects and potential clients all the time. In addition to clients, they have, in addition to a lot of applications and a lot of data sources, they have a lot of data tools. This doesn't strike me as an either or type situation. Tell me how a data team starts to see this fit within the things that they already have. What would they be challenging with this? What would they be collaborating with this? I mean, how does it fit in their larger tool set?
Yeah. So I think coming back to my previous question or previous answer, our ultimate goal is that Atlan becomes kind of the knowledge hub and brain hub for every thing and interaction the data team is doing. That's our vision. Today, where we fit in typically, we'll integrate with the cloud data warehouse, with your pipelines, with things like dbt, with your BI layer, and create kind of like a business context layer on top of all of those tools. And so from a principles perspective, I think it's important to highlight that we're not like an orchestration layer, or we're not processing, like we're a fundamentally virtualized solution. So data quality rules, as an example, should be happening at the pipeline level. But our vision is that we would be that kind of business context layer. And so in terms of what we're replacing and where we'd fit in and how teams start to use us, first and foremost, we're replacing some of the ad hoc tools that or ad hoc requests and some of the disparate tools, whether it's Confluence, Sheets, SharePoint, internal wikis, et cetera. We're trying to build that single source of truth to replace all those tools. And then the second piece, which I think is important to highlight, this is as much a change management solution as it is a technology solution. And so you can adopt a tool, but if there's not a culture change within the organization, and to your question earlier on that data ops culture and the data as a product mindset, if there's not a change management component there, then it doesn't matter if it's Atlan, no solution will be successful. So that's kind of how we see ourselves fitting in. Tactically speaking, we're highly focused on value in the first 30 days, can get up and running in a few hours. And from there, we start to work with customers to build workflows and processes that put Atlan as the center of everything context related to your data ecosystem.
So let's hang on that for 1 second. So really, I think we're getting close to wrapping it up, but I do want people to understand kind of what they should be thinking about and where you're engaging in an organization and where you're having the most meaningful conversations. I mean, what are the groups you're talking to, and how best do they engage in a consideration cycle for an Atlan solution?
Yeah. So there's a few different personas that we typically work with within the organization. To the extent there's a chief data officer or a chief data analytics officer, that's the primary one. That's still obviously a very nascent title, and I think the last time we did our research, there's hundreds of those folks with that title on LinkedIn, and so that's, I mean, if an organization is thinking of data at that scale and that strategically, I think that's the place where we want to engage. Our typical power users, or the sphere of folks that are using Atlan on a day-to-day basis, are the BI and analytics organizations, the data analysts and analytics organizations, as well as data engineering. Broadly, anyone that's working on the data platform or insights within the organization.
And what are they saying internally that moves the consideration further along? I mean, what are they saying they need?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that we typically hear from customers to we have no alignment in how key metrics or definitions are defined. Um, we have no way to find, or our business has no way to find tables in Snowflake. Our documentation is in a bunch of different disparate systems, and there's a lot of tribal knowledge that exists. I think the common and like if I had to put a single thing that data teams are facing, our data teams get too many requests and we're too reactive. And so I think everything kind of stems from there, but it's all related to making data discoverable and accessible, providing the right context, tagging, documentation, and providing the trust and visibility over that different data asset.
So you're head of North America. Somebody from North America on this show what would you like them to do in terms of reaching out and engaging with your team?
Yeah, just let me know. So Andrew at atlan.com. It's easy enough. I'll route it and be engaged to the right person on our team and continue to be engaged on our end. We have a pretty strong social following as well. So if you want to check us out on LinkedIn or Twitter, we post a ton of best practices and frameworks and tools.
Tell me a little bit about what you're looking for in 2022 as we're wrapping up.
What we're looking personally, professionally,
I think probably from a data collaboration perspective.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I mean, I think we all know what we're looking for professionally, maybe to be able to get out on the road a little bit.
So my kind of bold prediction for 2022 is that it will be the year of every company realizing that they are a data company. And we'll see a lot of strategic initiatives revolve to X company as a data company. And it doesn't matter if you're in tech, logistics, plastics, or materials. I think irrespective of the industry, folks will start to realize that data is a strategic asset to their business. And so we're looking forward to guiding folks on how to treat data as a product and shifting that mindset internally.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing time, certainly, to be in this space. Andrew, thank you very much for that presentation. We appreciate it and being a part of this demo day.
Same here. Thanks so much.
You bet. All right, we're off and rolling. One down, two to go. Please stick with us, and we'll see you just in a few minutes. Thanks.
Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston with presentations from prominent industry vendors, Solutions Review presents Data Demo Day, a virtual trade show for data management and analytics.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome back to Data Demo Day. This event allows us to give you an inside look at the top data technologies available today. The three solutions we're focused on each offer a different and compelling value proposition across data collaboration, data integration, and data analytics. And our next demonstration will be from Ahana. Ahana offers the only managed service for Presto on AWS, with the vision to simplify open data lake analytics. Presto is the open source project created by Facebook and used at Uber and Twitter, to name a few, and the de facto standard for fast SQL processing on data lakes. Ahana Cloud delivers an easy-to-use Presto software as a service that enables data platform teams to provide high-performance SQL analytics on their S3 data lakes and other data sources. And joining us today from San Francisco is Head of Solutions Engineering at Ahana, Asif Kazi. Asif, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Doug, for having me again on the show. Really excited to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're back. We had a nice chat, was it about a year ago?
Earlier this year.
Earlier this year, which was great because I think this particular solution is incredibly relevant at the moment, particularly because of all of the cloud transformation happening. Just to level set, I'd love to get a little bit more about your background and how you're thinking about the Ahana solution. Then I'll step back and let you have at it. But let's talk a little bit about your background. I know you've been promoted since we last talked. You're now head of solutions architecture. Tell me a little bit about kind of what's happening since we last spoke and really, how you're seeing the opportunity for Ahana personally.
Yeah, so interestingly, Ahana is not even 2 years old, right? And we've already seen significant traction in the industry. There's a compelling need that we're solving for as far as our customers is concerned. I've been in the data space for an extended period of time, over 15 plus years, done everything from ETL to ingest to NoSQL, to you name it, right? From the traditional RDBMS to cloud data warehouses, as well as ETL ingest, right? And we've seen where the industry is heading. Cloud data warehouses will continue to stay, but the industry is heading more and more towards open data lake analytics, right? And the company traditionally leading the charge has been Databricks and AWS. And more companies have realized that that's the way to go because storage is cheap, compute can be spun up and spun down when you need it. And that's essentially where Presto has thrived in the ecosystem. And the complexity of managing a Presto system was a real pain in the industry. And we've believed that we have addressed it and we're providing a unique value prop to the industry. And we're seeing more and more, not just customers, but even the open source community flocking towards that open data lake analytics solution. And I'll talk more about it as we go through the presentation.
Well, and I also want to talk about a lot of, I think at the end, I really want to get your perspective because you're leading a team of folks that are talking directly to customers and prospects, and you're really kind of seeing things happening at the molecular level. And as you just alluded to, in just the last 9 months, things have changed radically. And certainly with all the external factors happening with remote work and data being distributed, there's a lot to talk about. So I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to let you take it from here, give you, whatever room you need within the confines of the next 45 minutes to present the Ahana solution. I'll be jumping back in. I'll have some questions. We'll take some questions from the audience and go through how best to proceed from there. So
awesome.
Talk to you in a bit.
Cool, thank you. So first and foremost, we're Ahana. We provide, as Doug mentioned, open data lake analytics for Presto. We are a part of the AWS partner network. We are a part of the data and analytics competency as well as the ISV Accelerate program. First and foremost, even before I get into Ahana, I'd like to talk about what Presto is, right? Presto is an open source MPP SQL engine. It was originally developed at Facebook as a replacement for Hive. The beauty of Presto is that you can query in place. Essentially, when you're talking about query in place, you're essentially saying that, hey, I don't really need to ETL my data from one place to the other. I can literally query a wide variety of data sources that exist in place without ever actually ETLing the data. The beauty of Presto is that it's not just query in place. You can literally federate query across disparate systems, which means that, hey, if I needed to join the data sitting between S3 and my Redshift database, or sitting between S3 and MySQL, or any of those data sources that you see in the picture, I can do all of that. The beauty of Presto, unlike Spark or Spark SQL, is that it's ANSI SQL compliant. So any business analyst, any user who has familiarity with SQL can literally go and write a SQL query and can be completely blissfully unaware of what the backend system is and can join and federate across those disparate sources. Again, as I mentioned, originally developed at Facebook, it's been proven on petabytes and petabytes of data. And essentially we say Presto at any scale, which means that even though the likes of Facebook or Meta using it today, Uber's using it today, Twitter's using it today, there's small companies like Cartona, right, and Morningstar and a few others, right, which are actually using the technology for smaller use cases as well as large petabytes and petabytes of data. We spoke about SQL on anything, which means that you can run SQL queries on a data source, whether or not it natively supports SQL. The Presto SPI essentially abstracts the complexity away from you, which means as long as there's a connector, which essentially can speak the language of the underlying data source, you can run queries against that data source and federate across that data source. Which means that even if a connector doesn't exist today, you can write one, or somebody in the community could write one for you, and you could literally query across any of those data sources because Presto is completely open source. You have full access to the code, and there is no vendor lock-in per se. Again, the Presto architecture is comprised of a coordinator and multiple workers, which means that, hey, you have the ability to linearly scale out depending upon your query needs. You could start off with a small cluster. As your query needs grow, you could scale out the cluster. And again, if the cluster is not in use, you can scale it down, which essentially gives you cost optimization, price performance, so on and so forth. Presto is agnostic to what you use in the front end, which means that, hey, if you're a data engineer and you like using Zeppelin, Jupyter, Python scripts, etc., by all means, go ahead and use that. If you're a business analytics user and you like Excel, or you like Power BI, Looker, Tableau, you have the ability to do that. Tons of BI analytics dashboard exist today, which are essentially being used and being able to connect to Presto and federate the query across various data sources. So that's a high-level introduction of what Presto as a technology is. Why don't I next talk about where the community is, right? As I mentioned, the industry is heading towards cloud data lake, and though cloud data warehouses and traditional data warehouses have their place where cost optimization, segregation of compute and storage exists, is essentially in cloud data lakes. And you can already see Presto has made a significant dent in the industry. Over the past few years, it's almost caught up with Spark SQL. We believe that over the next couple of years, we will essentially overtake Spark SQL as the default query engine of choice because of the power, because of the speed, and because of the simplicity that Presto provides relative to Spark SQL. There are other competing technologies out there, but they haven't really made a dent in the ecosystem, while Presto has grown leaps and bounds in the ecosystem. And this is not Ahana telling the story. This is essentially what the GitHub projects and DB engines is telling you. So again, we're going to essentially drive the next generation of innovation speed of data analytics, and we believe we're in a strong trajectory to get there. Where's the community heading? You'll see over the last 6 months, over 300,000 Docker pulls, a significant increase in number of contributors. Slack members are growing exponentially. The number of meetups are growing. And then again, people just love the project and are continuously contributing to it. Here's the feather in our cap, right? Ahana, again, not even a 2-year-old company. We've significantly grown in both in terms of speed as well as contribution to the open source project. We stand as the number 2 contributor to the open source project by organization after Facebook, right? That itself is a story to tell, simply because, hey, we're not even 2 years old, and that talks about Ahana's commitment to open source and the community in terms of growth over there. Some of the things that I can talk about is essentially contribution of Ranger, which is essentially security integration with the open source project, right? Writing of the CC++ worker, right? All of that, our team is heavily involved along with Facebook or Meta, as well as the other open source community contributors. So excited trajectory, excited about the project, and excited about the growth. Again, for folks who are interested, there's an orally book that's available out there. You can learn a lot. The who's who of the community are contributing to that book, reviewing it, etc. will give you a lot of valuable insight if you're interested to know more about Presto. Stephen, me, and Dipti Boker, both of who are founders on the project, are also Presto board members, right? Dipti is the community outreach and the program chair. Stephen, me, is again the Presto treasurer and the board member. So it's not just the development and the product management and the engineering team, but also at the core, right? At the even the top level, as far as Ahana is concerned, we are aligned with Presto, the community, and the Linux Foundation itself. Again, we spoke about this a bit. Not only are the who's who using Presto, but even smaller companies like Referral Exchange, right? Cartona, etc., using Presto both in commercial form, either as Ahana customers or even in open source. And this is just a small set of logos just to give you an impression of the size, scale, breadth, and depth of usage of Presto. Again, what this slide will tell you is that it's not a specific use case. It's not a specific domain, right? You'll see everything from retail, advertisements, right? Images, financial services, et cetera, et cetera. The user base extends across horizontals and across verticals. So that is, again, a very compelling story for folks who are looking at adopting Presto as their analytics open data lake warehouse. So let's just talk about some of the Presto use cases that are out there, right? Again, the most common thing Presto is used for is reporting and dashboarding, right? Fast, interactive, analytic queries, SQL for data science. The importance of federated query, I can't stress enough. Again, the beauty of no ETL, again, time to query without actually moving the data. Imagine the fact that you don't have to go reach out to a data engineer, please ETL this data from this source to this destination. You can have time to insight of literally zero if you have essentially the data source set up, and you can quickly query that data set. The important thing about Presto is, again, fast customer-facing app analytics. It's not just important to do backend analytics in terms of how's the data being used, right? What are the outliers, so on and so forth, but interactive analytics as far as customers are concerned are also available. I'll talk later about a customer of ours called Securonics and how they're using the technology as far as the SIEM system is concerned. Again, Presto does provide transformation using SQL and ETL. So if you wanted to take data from MySQL, write it to S3, or you wanted to write from MySQL to another data source, you could do that. Again, any-to-any data movement is also possible using SQL, which means, hey, you no longer have to be an ETL developer to do simplistic ETL. You could move data without actually knowing specific ETL technologies like Matillion or Informatica, so on and so forth. And data lakehouse analytics is where the industry is heading, and we'll talk about that journey in a bit. So here's my spiel in terms of where the industry is heading, and I know, Doug, you asked about this, right? Data warehouses are there to stay, right? Much like mainframes. The data warehouses have changed essentially what they used to be, right? From traditional on-prem data warehouses like Vertica or Greenplum or Teradata to essentially cloud data warehouses. Data warehouses are great to serve a specific need, but there are two important challenges as far as data warehouses are concerned, whether they're on-prem or whether they are in the cloud, right? First and foremost, they're closed, which means that, hey, you have vendor lock-in. You're essentially committing to a marriage which you cannot get out of without essentially significant amount of alimony and significant amount of effort that you need to put in there. Don't get me wrong, data warehouses have their place. They provide speed, ease of use, right? And importantly, traditional relational structure which users are used to and familiar with. And so it's easy part to get there from a traditional RDBMS to a traditional cloud data warehouse or a data warehouse. And it's great for tens of terabytes of data, right? But again, the thing is, it's closed source. Where the industry has headed is essentially a marriage between cloud data warehouses and Amazon S3, simply because storage is cheap. Essentially, data warehouses have the ability to tie in data sitting in S3, quickly ingest it using the native ingest tools, and be able to provide that ease of ingest and use of external tables to use the essentially MPP query engine that these cloud data warehouses provide, and be able to use the power of S3 or a blob storage along with it. But here's where the industry is heading, right? Because more and more firms are moving data to their cloud data warehouses. Storage is completely segregated. We're talking about terabytes to petabytes of data sitting there, either from a historical standpoint or going there from an ongoing basis. And where the industry is heading is essentially segregation of storage and compute, which means, hey, you have the ability to spin up and spin down clusters or compute at will, have the ability to use the underlying storage. And here's where the power of Presto comes into play, right? It's a completely distributed MPP SQL query engine. It linearly scales with addition of nodes. You can query petabytes and petabytes of data, much like Facebook, Uber, Twitter, so on and so forth. And the beauty of Presto is it's completely open source, which means that there is no vendor lock-in. Whether you choose an Ahana SaaS platform or you choose the open source Presto, you have the ability to do that with ease, right? You just need to take over the operational burden of managing those clusters if you choose to do it yourself. And again, the beauty of Presto, completely agnostic to what tools you use from querying the engine, right? Whether it's machine learning needs through TensorFlow, Spark, SQL, so on and so forth, or simply using Python, Jupyter notebooks, or you have pure play traditional BI analytics needs. You want you to use Tableau, Looker, Power BI, etc. You have the ability to do that. So if you just look at this from an architecture standpoint, it'll be apparently visible that, hey, you have the ability to scale out and scale up and scale down at will, and the pure play segregation of compute and storage without vendor lock-in, as well as full-fledged cost optimization. And the way I like to look at it is essentially price performance, right? Pay the price that you're willing to pay for the performance that you need, right? And that's the beauty of open data lake analytics, and that's what Ahana is solving for the ecosystem. Why don't we talk about challenges with SQL on open data lakes, right? I already spoke about, hey, the differences between a traditional cloud data warehouse and open data lakes. So yes, you can do open data lake analytics yourself, but here are some of the challenges. Firstly, do it yourself is complicated. If you have a large data engineering or data platform or data architecture team, and you have the requisite expertise, more power to you, you have the ability to do that. The goal of Ahana is to democratize open data lakes for the community, and that's what we do. By all means, you can do it yourself, but again, that means a higher total cost of ownership because you're managing the operational costs, you're managing the configuration management, you're managing the skill sets, you're managing, hey, keeping up to speed with the latest and greatest version of Presto, so on and so forth. That does take amount of resources and dedication. If you're a large company, you might have the ability to do that, especially if you're already managing large Hadoop and Spark clusters. But if you're a small company, that tends to be challenging for you. Secondly, there are cloud data warehouses and serverless architectures. But again, as I spoke about it, the moment there's serverless architectures or even the cloud data warehouses, not only is there vendor lock-in, which means you're paying a premium for the technology, the engineering, the marketing, etc., that these cloud data warehouses are charging. Additionally, technologies like Athena or even Redshift Spectrum charge you on a per query basis, which means as your data set grows, it turns out to be fairly expensive. As an example, Athena or Redshift Spectrum will charge you $5 per terabyte scanned. Imagine you're scanning terabytes and terabytes of data for every single query. That is a hefty bill for running a query. Unlike a managed or a SaaS solution like Ahana, you're simply paying for the compute, which is an order of cents compared to $5 per terabyte, which means that from a price performance standpoint, a technology like Ahana provides you significantly better price performance than what a cloud data warehouse or even a serverless architecture is able to provide you at scale. Lastly, yes, serverless architectures are great. Athena is a great piece of technology to quickly get started, but with the simplicity comes the nature that the moment it's a serverless architecture, it's a black box. You've got completely no control over the backend resources, which means if you needed a query to run faster and you really needed to make it run faster, there is absolutely nothing you could do about it. There is no way to request AWS for additional resources to run on Athena. It manages the backend resources, which means that there are constraints in terms of the amount of concurrency that you get on the cluster, what you can do, the number of concurrent writes, right, the number of concurrent users, so on and so forth. That means if you're trying to run Presto at enterprise scale using AWS Athena, that tends to be challenging for most customers. And that's essentially what Ahana provides, is a fully managed SaaS solution, which takes care of all these limitations and provides a compelling value prop as far as price performance, ease of use, and management. So Doug, you asked about this, right? Where is the industry heading and where is the technology heading? And I wanted to just put this simple diagram out there, right? Depending upon where you are in your data ecosystem, you sit into one of these categories as a customer or even a prospect, right? You're either pre-data warehouse, where you're a very small company, only thing that you're dealing with is your transactional processing systems that primarily are DBMS users. as a customer who wants to gain insight into the analytics, you're evaluating both cloud data warehouses as well as traditional or the new data lake capabilities, because you're hearing that that's where the industry is heading. Again, as far as expertise is concerned, depending upon the teams, if you're a small team, you have very little or no in-house ETL expertise. So you've got one of two choices, right? And we're seeing more and more customers take the fast track route and directly go to the data lake rather than the step one and the step two approach, where you go into a pre-data lake environment, wherein you adopt what is natural to you, essentially a traditional RDBMS structure, right? Go to a cloud data warehouse, use ETL to move data into the cloud data warehouse, get into the vendor lock-in, pay the expensive price that the cloud data warehouses have to offer, and you build the ETL expertise that you need, but that ETL expertise is centered around CSV and data warehousing formats, right? Let's talk about why customers have traditionally gone into the pre-data lake environment, right? For two reasons. First and foremost, familiarity with the traditional columnar-based structure. And secondly, is the lack of asset compliance that used to exist on data lakes. But again, where the industry is headed is that now there are technologies like Delta Lake, there is Hoodie, there's Iceberg, etc., which makes transaction processing or asset compliance possible on data lakes, which means you no longer need to take the intermediate step. You can actually go into the data lake without actually having to worry about, hey, I need to update data in my data lake. It's an immutable store. That's no longer the case. Abstractions over S3 and blob stores now make it possible to do asset compliance or updates over the S3 object store. And that's why more and more companies are taking the fast track to the data lake. And that's essentially where the industry is heading. Even if you are already in the data lake, as I mentioned earlier, vendor lock-in or even the price performance that cloud data warehouses have to offer have essentially compelled folks to start looking at open data lake technologies to optimize their costs, right? If you're a Snowflake user or a Redshift user, you'll quickly see that, hey, addition of nodes, addition of compute, right? Especially if your data is going fairly quickly, turns to spiral out of control fairly quickly. That's number one. Number two, you'll see there would be a certain set of use cases you don't need the diamond layer of performance to get to, right? You're okay with a reasonable amount of performance, or potentially you could get better or comparable performance on the cloud data warehouse. We have customers like grofers who have essentially moved from the traditional cloud data warehouse over to Open Data Lake on Presto and are getting comparable or even better price performance using Presto than using a traditional cloud data warehouse. And again, what is making all of this possible is technologies like Hoodie, Iceberg, Delta Lake, which means that, hey, as data is changing, and we know that data is continuously changing for most customers, you have the ability to go and make inserts, upserts, updates to that data sitting in S3, and you no longer have to worry about, hey, S3 is an immutable store and I no longer can update that data. That's no longer true. These technologies make that possible. So our recommendation is essentially take the fast track route. You will get better price performance, and you don't have to go through the intermediate step of going via the cloud data warehouse. Okay. Moving on. So here's what the data lake stack looks like, and I touched upon it when I went about the journey. So everybody's already familiar with the top level as well as the bottom level, right? Presto is agnostic to the front-end query tools, and it's agnostic to essentially what the back-end ecosystem is as far as storage is concerned. The wide variety of connectors that are available out there make it possible to not just query the data lake, use a metastore such as Glue, but you could federate queries across multiple data sources, MySQL, Redshift, right, Snowflake, so on and so forth. The magic now happens in the transaction manager space. Apache Hoodie, Delta Lake, Iceberg provide you mutability over a traditional immutable data store. Additionally, for those who are security conscious, right, technologies such as Apache Ranger and Lake Formation have significantly grown. As a matter of fact, we recently announced first-class citizen integration as a part of AWS Lake Formation launch, not just as a part of the reInvent, but PrestoCon, which happened last week. We recently announced full-fledged integration on the security side as far as lake formation is concerned. So today you can get up and running with AWS lake formation, granular access control, if you're an AWS customer, right? And at the heart of it sits Presto, which means that you have the ability to linearly scale out and scale in as you see fit, pay the price for the performance that you need. And importantly, there is no vendor lock-in, right? So whether you're using open source Presto, or whether you're using a SaaS platform such as Ahana, because the compute and the storage is completely segregated, you can use Presto open source, or you can use Ahana Presto to get the simplicity and ease of use that the technology provides, right? And this is the stack of the future, and this is going to grow with additional feature functionality, performance, and even deeper integrations coming with the technologies that are listed over here. So let's talk about Ahana Cloud for Presto, right? I already spoke about it. I said that, hey, what is Ahana Cloud for Presto doing for you? It's simplifying the operational ease of use and management as far as the Presto cluster is concerned at the price that you're willing to pay. The second, or probably the first thing on anybody's mind is, hey, I love SaaS and managed services, but this is pure play data. I don't want my data because of HIPAA compliance, right? California compliance, so on and so forth. And even GDPR, I never want that data to ever leave my ecosystem. I want complete control over the security and the encryption keys. How do I go about it? The beauty of Ahana is that it's a full-fledged in VPC deployment, which means that the data never, ever leaves your environment. The clusters are created, or what we call as the compute plane, within a VPC, within your environment. And without you explicitly providing a path to get to the data, the clusters will have no access to any of the data sources, which means you need to provide a role which has access to any of those data sources. You need to actually provide a network path to get to any of those data sources, whether it's VPC peering, transit gateway, so on and so forth, right? Unless you explicitly take the action of connecting a cluster to those data sources, the clusters will never have access to those data sources. And that's the beauty of Ahana. It's a full-fledged in VPC deployment, which means you have complete visibility on the policies, you've got complete visibility on the connection, the network traffic, right? The data and so forth, and you have complete control of who has access to what. The beauty of this ecosystem is it completely sits on EKS, which means high availability, performance, right? Disaster recovery, all of that comes free. And we operationally manage it from the control plane automatically, which sits in the Ahana VPC. And the only thing that ever gets exchanged between the control plane and the compute plane is control messages. So if the user goes to the console and says, hey, I want to scale out the cluster, the console is going to send a message to the compute plane saying, hey, the user has requested scaling up the cluster. Here are the appropriate credentials. Hey, can you scale that out, right? And that's the beauty of Ahana Cloud for Presto, completely secure, and significantly improves your overall total cost of ownership with simplicity, ease of use, and point-and-click user interface. So as far as Ahana Cloud overview, again, I've touched upon this in various forms. It's a managed console, right? Point and click to add data sources, and I'll show that to you in a demo. You can query the data in place, and importantly, hands-free cluster management, right? Cluster has health checks, right? If a node goes down, it'll automatically recover without you actually intervening. That's the beauty of Kubernetes, as well as the health checks and the sanity that we've built into the solution. And the importance of it is intelligent defaults for the configuration. So depending upon the workload choice that you make, depending upon your instance type, depending upon the connectors that you choose, we will automatically in the backend using our own heuristics, will configure the backend clusters for and tune those clusters accordingly. That way you get the best performance that you need for your workload and for the instances that you've allocated. So this takes away the operational burden that you need to undertake in terms of, hey, how do I tune this cluster, right? What are the appropriate parameters for Hive? What are the appropriate parameters for MySQL, so on and so forth. We will automatically take care of the tuning for you without you actually having to worry about it. Why don't we talk about some case studies? Everybody's interested in case studies to prove the proof is in the pudding. Here's an example of Securonics, all right, and a comparison of essentially price performance of running Presto on Athena versus running on Ahana Presto. You can see the stark difference in the price performance, right? It's not a tiny amount of difference. You can see a significant amount of difference at scale. And again, the comparison exists on various instance types. Again, what we're stressing over here is depending upon the price that you're willing to pay for the performance that you need, right? You can scale out your cluster or scale down your cluster and get the performance that you need. Similarly, a great example of referral exchange. Referral exchange, unlike Securonix, is more or less interactive queries. Referral exchange was essentially batch analytics. They were taking over 72 hours to essentially perform an end-to-end data engineering pipeline. We were able to complete that in less than a day, right? Again, this is essentially time to query and time to value, which means that, hey, the data was 3 days stale. It took a significant amount of effort, which means that, hey, if a pipeline failed, you had to go and redo the whole thing over and again, completed that in less than a day and optimized it even further. Great examples and referenceable customers as far as Ahana is concerned. Again, here's the value prop. Again, fully integrated and pre-configured. You don't really need to do ETL, and you can perform in place data analytics. And so customers who are interested in this, prospects who are interested, would love for them to sign up for an Ahana trial and see for themselves the value that Ahana has to provide. Again, we were invited to Jeff Barr's AWS startup. You can see the Securonix CEO over there, Sachin, right, do a joint presentation with Stephen, our CEO, and they talked highly about Ahana and the value that Ahana had to offer, and how they compared additional technologies out there, right, including AWS Athena as well as other technologies, and why they are one of our trusted partners and are growing and deploying this in their production environment for their actual end customers to use. So last but not least, I touched upon this a bit. Security is a key component which customers had been asking for, and AWS took the initiative to essentially solve that for their customers. We were an AWS launch partner. We recently announced the integrated offerings of the Ahana, the AWS Lake Formation Credential Vending API, right? So we have native integration with Data Lake at this point in time, which means you can granularly control access to your underlying data set, which means that, hey, X user has access to only such and such a schema. Another user has only access to these columns from this table. All of that is possible, not just through AWS Lake Formation, but you will hear this soon towards the end of the month that we're going to announce full integration with Apache Ranger, which is, again, another technology which allows you to granularly control access over Hive, and that's going to be announced as well. So security, which was a key feature that customers were asking for, is now available at a granular access control level. Now, when we jump into the heart of the matter, is what everybody was waiting for, is let's just dive into a quick demo. I'm going to start off by showing you what the Ahana console looks like, right? And again, it's important for me to compare this to essentially a do-it-yourself offering, such as either EMR Presto, or even a complete do-it-yourself offering like a managed Hadoop offering, or even do-it-yourself Presto. Ahana provides a simple, slick user interface to go ahead and create a cluster at the capacity that you need. All you have to do is specify a cluster name, specify your workload type. Are you looking at it from a high concurrency or a low concurrency? High concurrency is essentially interactive query or analytics, while low concurrency is essentially, hey, I'm just running batch query or ETL workloads. I want to use this cluster for that. The next thing that the user has the ability to do is go ahead and select the instance types for both the coordinator and the worker. This is something that you categorically cannot do on the Athena side, which means that you've got absolutely no control in terms of making these queries faster. Ahana also provides you the option to use either a static cluster or an auto-scaling cluster. So you can choose to scale out based on a step size your cluster if your CPU utilization on an aggregate across the nodes reaches 75% utilization. So which means that you can automatically scale out and scale back in when the cluster is not in use. Not just that, even on a static scaling standpoint, you have the ability to say that, hey, my cluster, if nobody's using the cluster for more than 30 minutes, it's a good indication that, hey, nobody's going to need to run queries for an extended period of time. Why don't you scale this cluster down to a single node? What this is going to do is essentially, say you had a 10 node, 20 node, or 30 node cluster, it'll scale it down to a single node, which means that the first query that the cluster receives it's not going to fail, but the cluster will take on that query. And then as the cluster scales up, all subsequent queries will be at the performance that you need. While the first query might run a little slow, no query will actually fail, right? And that's the beauty of it, because now you have the ability to get and optimize the performance without having to go set up cron jobs at the end of the day. Hey, can you shut down my cluster in the evening and then set it up at 8 a.m., right? This provides you the best of both worlds, wherein you just have a single instance running to take any queries during idle time if nothing else is going on. Most customers in AWS would end up using Glue as their metastore. As we mentioned, we're a first-class citizen integrated with AWS Lake Formation and Glue. So you could either use that. If you had your own metastore, you could use that. Alternatively, we do provide a managed metastore as far as Ahana is concerned. So you have the option of using that or both. We do completely audit every single query that gets written to the cluster. You can turn that on. Additionally, we provide something which neither EMR provides nor does Athena provide, is essentially data lake caching, which means that we, depending upon the queries that you run, we will cache fragments of that data. So you no longer have to go back to S3 to query that data, which means not only are you saving on API calls to S3, but you're getting better performance and better price performance because of using IO caching. And we've seen as high as 3 times to 10 times performance increase, depending upon your use case and the concurrency needs. You can select one or more users who've got access to the cluster, and all you have to do is go create the cluster, and this will go ahead and create the cluster for you. So once you have the cluster created, your cluster would be in one of 3 states. It's either an active running cluster, which you can actually see they're all in green, or it's an inactive cluster, which means that, hey, the complete definition, the complete attachment of data sources, all of those are completely preserved. And hey, if I either wanted to go start this cluster back because, hey, this was a dev test cluster, I could go ahead and do that. That's option number 1. Alternatively, I could go and use the REST API that Ahana provides and do that programmatically. So both of those are options. I can completely operationally manage my cluster, right? Start, stop, restart, either again through the front-end user interface or through the REST API that we provide. You've got complete control over changing the configuration. So, hey, I had a cluster. Now I say that, hey, my concurrency needs have changed. I'm no longer using high concurrency. I want to go to low concurrency. We will go ahead and tune that cluster automatically in the backend. So that's an option. I can change my scaling policy. I want to change the minimum node counts. I want to change the idle time. All of that I can do simple point and click without you ever having to worry about it. Let's just talk about the connection endpoints, right? And we spoke about this earlier, wherein, hey, it doesn't matter how you're connecting. You can use the REST API. You can use the Python libraries to connect to the Presto cluster. Or if you're a JDBC UDBC user, you can use that as well. So both of these endpoints are exposed in the user interface for you to simply point and click. You can configure and manage one or more data sources. Again, simple point and click interface. 6 of the most commonly used ones are exposed in this user interface. There are over 26 plus connectors available in the community, and you can use any of those with the Ahana Presto. So there's Iceberg, there is SQL Server, there's Accumulo, so on and so forth. All of those you can use with Ahana. Absolutely no issues, simply because it's based on open source Presto. Then once you have a data source set up, all you have to do is go manage the cluster, go back to manage data sources, and then you can just go and add the additional data source and modify the cluster. And that's it. You've got a data source attached. The beauty of the data sources is they're segregated from the cluster itself. So you can take the same data source and attach it to one or more clusters as you see fit. And that way you have a central place where you're managing all the data sources and the access associated with those data sources. Why don't I next show you essentially the Presto user interface? And this is something that is not available in the Athena standpoint. On the Athena side, you've got absolutely no visibility in terms of what the query is doing. What is the concurrency level, right? What does the query plan look like? And the Ahana Cloud for Presto offering gives you complete visibility. You can actually go and see what each of those individual stages are doing. You can see what the splits look like. You can see what the performance is, so on and so forth. None of that is actually visible to you on the Athena side. And that's one of the biggest shortcomings of Athena, right? That you've got absolutely no control. You don't know what session parameters. Actually, you can't even set session parameters as far as the queries are concerned. So you've got no ability to query, to essentially control how the query is going to perform, right? And all of that is available through Ahana's SaaS offering. You can actually see at an individual worker level what each of those queries are doing. You can see exactly what work is going on each and every individual node, which gives you a significant amount of power and control in terms of looking at data transfer rates, right? Looking at why the query is not working the way it is, so on and so forth. And that's essentially the power of Ahana Cloud for Presto. Next thing, what I'd like to show you is a simple query interface. We bundle that. It's an open source project called Superset. It's bundled with Ahana Cloud for Presto. This is essentially the tool for your data discovery needs. I'm just going to run a simple query against this data set. And what I'm doing literally over here is joining data, which is sitting in MySQL. Let me make that a little bit bigger so that you can see. I'm using the movie lens data, right, which is essentially available on Kaggle. I'm taking about 6,500 rows, which is sitting in MySQL, and about 25 or 26 million rows sitting in S3, running a join and aggregation across that data set. And that thing comes back in an order of 3 seconds, right? So 26 million rows against MySQL data, ranked, ordered, right, grouped by, back in 2 seconds, right? And again, this is comparable or faster than what you would get in a traditional cloud data warehouse. And again, all this with no ETL. Remember, I haven't moved the data using ETL from MySQL. I'm literally querying it at the source. There's data already sitting in S3, which is my movie ratings. So I've literally joined S3 data sitting in Parquet and RDBMS data sitting in MySQL, and have been able to query that right with ease. We have got about 15 minutes remaining. What I'm going to quickly jump into and show you a quick demo about security. And before I do that, let me show you what I'm going to show you. So over here, what you'll see, there are about 4 different roles, right? And there are different users associated with it. I'm going to quickly jump into what that access looks like. And this is essentially integration with Glue using AWS's recently released credentials vending API for lake formation. And again, this is difficult to see, but believe me what I'm telling you. So here's essentially 4 users, right? And each of those users have different access privileges to the underlying data lake. What we're essentially looking for over here is what these users have access to from the sales database, right? And over here, there's a table called quota in the sales database. I'm going to just describe the table so that you can see what the table looks like. The 2 columns, right? One is the sales rep, and then what is the status or the quota attainment. I'm going to first go and try and query everything from sales quota. And this guy is a sales rep. Let's see what happens over here. Over here, it tells you, hey, Logan doesn't have access on the status, which is essentially the quota. So let's see if I can work around that and see if Logan has access to just the list of sales reps, right? And essentially, there were 2 columns, and all I'm querying over here is the rep column. And so Logan is not able to see what the quota attainment for those reps are, but he can actually see what those reps are in the database over here. Over here, the next user is Ali. Ali is from the marketing team. I'm going to see if she even has access to the sales database. She doesn't even have access to sales. And all this automatically is happening in the backend through AWS's credential vending API for lake formation. The only database that Ali has access to is marketing. Lastly, let's see, this is user Steven. Let's see what user Steven has access to. Because he is the CEO of the company, he has access to all the users as well as the sales quota attainment. That's great. Andy is our CRO. What does he have access to? He's got access to, again, everything from the sales quota, and this should just turn up in a second or so. There you go. Right. So you can granularly control access to, hey, the schema, the underlying table, and the underlying databases. And you have this, it is GA at this point as far as AWS is concerned, and you can start using this now. So that's all I had from an overall demo standpoint. Doug, back to you for any questions.
Outstanding. You got a lot in there, and I wanted to talk a little bit about a few of the points. Well done, by the way. Let's talk about on-demand compute effectively, or on-demand query, on-demand or query. How did you describe it?
Yeah. So this is what AWS calls it, right? On-demand provisioning of resources, right? So essentially segregation of storage and compute.
Right. So this is part of the evolution of cloud computing, now computing effectively on demand, where you're paying for just the computing power, as you were saying. You're paying essentially for just queries as opposed to paying all the time. But I want to ask you, as folks are trying to absorb what you're describing, which is clearly next level, how do they contextualize that with regard to everything that they've seen happening in the last 5 years with regard to AWS? I mean, is this the state of the art going forward, or is this, just a step along the way? I mean, where are we in terms of the evolution of this sort of solution?
Yeah. So this is the direction where the industry is heading, right? And let me explain why, right? So traditional cloud data warehouses or even data warehouses, right? The way MPP databases got their performance was essentially by co-locating the storage and compute together, right? So essentially you had a traditional, and let's start with the on-prem ecosystem, right? You had a traditional compute node sitting there, and you had an isolon or a hefty, expensive storage, right, married to that compute. And because the storage and compute were local, you got excellent performance, right? With the evolution of cloud, what's happened, right? That you are no longer investing in the fast infrastructure. AWS has done that for you, which means that there is excellent networking. It started off with a gig E, then it moved to 10 gigs. Now you're at 20 gigs in terms of network interface, which means that, hey, segregation of storage and compute is easy now because of the fact that, hey, network speeds are so fast. And the beauty of it is because of a storage like S3, which you're paying fractions of a cent for a storage, right? You no longer need the isolons. You no longer need fast SSD storage to put your data on. You can put it on S3 because of the speed of S3, the speed of the instances, and the speed of the network. All of those look like a unified entity, and you have the ability to provision these compute resources at will, right? The storage is there to stay. It's permanently there on S3. If I needed to run a query, hey, I could scale out my cluster if I already had one. If I didn't have a cluster, at a click of a button, I could provision compute resources. And less than 15 minutes, I have a cluster running, and I can run those fast queries on my ecosystem, right? And this is essentially where the industry is heading. And that might change from essentially cold to essentially warm standbys, which means that, hey, that 15 minutes, which used to be, hey, I started from cold, could change to an order of seconds or minutes with essentially warm standing instances out there, right? And that's essentially what I spoke about is time to query, right? Time to query is significantly going to change. AWS has already changed that from an Athena and serverless infrastructure standpoint. But again, as I mentioned earlier, there are challenges with that ecosystem, right?
So so you were on the AWS side before you went to Ahana, and so you have a unique perspective here. Where do you find, I mean, in addition to obviously them having AWS, where do you find traction in an organization with this type of solution? Are they aware of the Presto, solution and the Ahana configuration of it, or I mean, where are you kind of seeing yourselves fit within an organization?
Yeah. So first and foremost, kudos to AWS, right? They start with the customer first, which means that whatever is best for the customer, they firmly believe in that and they live and breathe that. So we are an AWS competency partner. We are a part of the AWS Accelerate program. As we mentioned earlier, we work closely with AWS as far as implementing the credentials vending, et cetera, right? So Athena solves specific problems, EMR solves specific problems. We have a better together story as far as AWS is concerned, right? What is the solution that customers do today when Athena doesn't meet their need? They're actually either doing a complete do-it-yourself Presto on EC2, or they're going to EMR, right? As I mentioned earlier, high total cost of ownership because of the complexities associated with it. And we take away that burden from the customer, which means on AWS, point and click, get up a Presto cluster, stop the cluster if you don't need. And we already have a lot of joint customers on AWS, right? We are today an AWS only solutions offering. We work closely with the business development team to solve problems for customers who actually need a solution such as Ahana.
So with regard to how folks begin to engage, I know you have a free trial on your website. Talk a little bit about the best way for folks to connect with Ahana product people and talk through the potential for an Ahana solution.
Yeah. So Ahana is available on the AWS marketplace, which means it's simple, complete, consolidated billing. You don't have to get into a separate contract. You can just go to the marketplace and subscribe to the Ahana solutions offering, right? My team, which is essentially the sales engineering and advisory services team, we offer essentially a guided onboarding for 14 days, which means that, hey, we'll look at your use case. We'll look at, hey, what the best practices you need, right? How would you go about approaching the overall solutioning of your solution? And we provided a complete for free 14-day guided trial to adopt the technology. And we help you go through that fast track route, which I mentioned earlier, without the baby step in the middle, right? And that's the best way to engage, right? Sign up for a trial. Our team is there to help you out to get onboarded with Ahana and get going.
And so so there is definitely a services layer that you bring to the table that allows people to take the knowledge that you've built and really extract that into their particular use case.
Absolutely, yes.
Excellent.
We actually go through an evaluation plan, talk about, hey, this is what the evaluation plan looks like. It's a mutual plan that's generated that meets the customer's needs. And that way, at the end of it, we can agree to the definition of done. And then at the end of it, the customer is successful. And after the 14 days, they can sign up for a full-fledged subscription.
And that's it. It's just literally 2 weeks of that
Yep.
sort of back and forth, and getting the plan and reviewing the plan, and then it's off to the races.
Absolutely. Checking the box. Does this meet your need? Yes. Operational? Yes. Performance? Yes. Okay, we're done.
Outstanding. So while I have you for one couple more minutes here, tell me a little bit about what you're looking forward to over the next year as we roll into 2022.
Yeah. So as I'd mentioned in the second or third slide, right, we believe that Ahana is essentially going to be the de facto standard as far as SQL querying on open data lakes, right? We're already seeing Presto essentially take that over, right, both in terms of Athena, etc. And we believe Ahana is going to be the de facto tool out there. So there is a lot of innovation coming into the ecosystem, as I mentioned, the security integration with Ranger, as well as with AWS Lake Formation. What we're really, really excited about is essentially rewriting all of the Presto workers in CC++, which means if you think that Presto is fast right now, wait until we're done with rewriting everything in CC++. It's going to be a rocket ship and and scale to your needs. Already initial tests, we are already seeing the need of 1/3 the capacity than what you're traditionally used to, right? So really looking forward to that innovation as it progresses over the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, and in the end, I mean, that's the challenge, right? You're trying to stay ahead of the massive aggregation of data that's continuing to build behind these solutions that you're putting on top of it. And I guess speed, needs to maintain its acceleration in order to handle the incoming data.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, outstanding. Well, thanks very much, Asif, for this presentation. It was great. Went through a lot of things. We appreciate the time, and best of luck in the new year.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you for having me.
You bet. All right, that is our second demonstration for Demo Day today. We will be back at the top of the hour with Matillion for our third and final demonstration. Stick with us. Thanks.
Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston with presentations from prominent industry vendors, Solutions Review presents Data Demo Day, a virtual trade show for data management and analytics. I'm
Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome back to Data Demo Day. This event allows us to give you an inside look at some of the top data technologies available today. The three solutions we're focused on each offer a different and compelling value proposition across data collaboration, data integration, and data analytics. And our next demonstration will be from Matillion. Their solution, Matillion ETL, is a data integration product purpose-built for the cloud. It natively integrates with Snowflake, Amazon Redshift, Google BigQuery, Microsoft Azure Synapse, and Delta Lake on Databricks to help organizations take advantage of the power, flexibility, and economics of the cloud. Matillion ETL integrates with an extensive list of pre-built data source connectors, or you can now build your own connector to any source. And joining us today from Denver, Colorado is Naval, Solution Architect Manager at Matillion. Naval, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here, and good to see you again, Doug.
It's great to see you again. I know we did this about a year ago, and a lot has transpired in that year. And I know Matillion continues to grow. Give us a little bit of, just for people who might not have been with us the last time, just give us a little bit of your background and how you got to Matillion, and a little bit of the opportunity that you see from a personal perspective, and then we'll get into the flow of the show.
So my name's Naval. I'm a Solution Architect Manager at Matillion. I've been with the company now for 2.5 years. It's time zipped by. I've enjoyed my time at Matillion. The best part about being at Matillion is the ability to help our customers get going with their data journeys in the cloud. And excited to be here to show everybody the product.
Well, we're excited to have you do that, and I know we do these data demo days specifically so that folks get a chance to see inside the solution. So I don't want to stand in the way of that. I'm going to take a step back for 35, 40 minutes, let you show everything that you'd like to show about what Matillion's up to, and certainly the solution itself. Then I'll jump back in. We'll have some questions. Certainly from the audience, certainly I'll have some questions, and then we'll wrap it up. But best of luck. We'll talk to you in a few minutes.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Welcome, everyone, to this product overview of Matillion ETL. On the agenda today, I'll quickly give an introduction about me, my overall career path, and we'll go into the overview of what Matillion ETL is. We will actually be looking at a demo of the product. I'll be going into the UI, explaining the different parts of the product. And finally, we'll get into the Q&A section. I encourage you guys to ask questions at the end of this. Would love to answer those. A quick background on my side. I've been in the data space for about 16, almost 17 years now. I started my career as a developer. I went into architecture. I worked for various different companies because I was consulting in my early in the early part of my career, and I've worked with a multitude of ETL tools, databases, MPP platforms. And at Matillion, as I said earlier, I love the product. I really believe in the product because we are purpose-built for cloud data warehouses. And the beauty of that is in the customer success team at Matillion, I get to work with customers to answer questions and get them started with implementations of Matillion. All right, so let's jump into the overview of Matillion ETL. What is Matillion ETL? Matillion ETL was built as a cloud-native ETL/ELT solution to work with the cloud data warehouses that are prominent in the data space. It's a UI-based development approach. So it's a GUI where you build your jobs, your extract, load, transform process. Being that end-to-end process where we rely on the ELT architecture, it is an enterprise-ready tool. It is highly secure, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. And it's purpose-built for the cloud data warehouse it's connecting to. We have 8 distinct platforms For Matillion ETL, as you can see in the list, we have 3 products for Snowflake on the 3 different platforms. We have a Matillion ETL for Redshift, for Azure Synapse, for Google BigQuery, and we recently launched our Delta Lake on Databricks products on AWS and Azure. Now, these 8 different platforms are purpose-built for the target data warehouse they are connecting to. The deployment model of Matillion, which makes it very secure, is when you launch Matillion, it launches an EC2 or a VM inside the customer's VPC. So Matillion as a company does not have access to that instance. It resides in the customer's VPC where all the security policies and controls that the customer decides can be applied to that instance. Sitting right next to those cloud data warehouses, we then can connect to all the different sources to first load that data into the cloud data platform, and then use pushdown SQL to transform that data, manipulate that data in that cloud data platform. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into the product demo. All right, so while this is coming up, the way you can get started on Matillion is through the pricing page. It's just matillion.com/pricing. You can scroll down to click on the Get Started for Free button. It gives you the option to select your cloud provider. The product I'm using today for the demo is Matillion ETL for Snowflake on AWS. So I'll click on the AWS selection. For the cloud data platform, I can select Snowflake, and it gives you the option to select your deployment. So you could use a CloudFormation template or an AMI. When I click on either of those, it does give that option to go to AWS, where you can select your region, your sizing for the instance, and it launches as that EC2 that hosts Matillion inside your VPC. Once that instance is up and running, you take the IP address or the DNS name of the instance and use a browser to point to that instance to get to the UI. The first time you log into the UI, you will have to create a project, which I've done here already. And for each project, you also create an environment. This environment is a name saved connection to the cloud data platform, the target you're connecting to. I have specified the account I'm connecting to along with the credentials, as well as in the last step, I select the defaults for role, warehouse, database, and schema. These are just the defaults. This does not mean you're tied down to a certain database or a certain schema when you're working with the product. There is another property for concurrent connections, which I'll talk about a little bit through this demo. Let's take a look at the UI itself. The top left section here is the Jobs Explorer. This is where you create jobs. You can right-click, create additional jobs. You can create folders to organize your jobs. Bottom left also has the Components menu, which has the list of various different components and connectors that you can leverage as you develop in the tool. You can drag and drop these components on the canvas, and when you click on a certain component, it shows you the Properties menu, which is where you set the properties to configure your component. Task menu is just feedback from the UI as you develop within the tool. For example, if I right click and validate this job, I can see the action happening for the validation of the job that's built. So Matillion relies on the ELT architecture. So we are extracting data from the sources, loading it as is into Snowflake with this particular product. And there is a transformation layer that you can use to manipulate that data. Having said that, there is 2 main types of jobs in Matillion. The one on the screen right now is an orchestration job. And orchestration serves the purpose of doing that EL, the extract and load. So with an orchestration, you get the option of all the different connector components that you can use to extract data, load it into your cloud target data platform. Once you've loaded that data into the target, there is a second type of job, which I'm doing a nested call to. It's a transformation job. Now, transformations run using pushdown SQL. What that means is when you're running this transformation, you are using a UI-based approach to develop, which makes it really easy to create, maintain, read. But in the background, these are creating pieces of SQL that get combined together to run on the cloud data platform when you execute this transformation. So really making use of the compute of the cloud data platform you're invested in and making the process much more scalable and efficient. All right, so let's take a look at that end-to-end process, right? I have some flights, civil aviation data that is publicly available. I have some flights data I'll be loading into Snowflake. I have planes reference data. Once I load those, we'll look at that transformation to see how I use that for transforming some of those data sets. Now, let's start with this orchestration. Now, this product is connecting to Snowflake, and Snowflake, being as elastic as it is with its compute, it has the auto warehouse command. In Matillion, we make it easier to leverage that command while building your Matillion or ELT process by having a component that lets you use that. So with this auto warehouse component, you get the option to point to the warehouse you want to change the properties for. In this case, I've pointed to the environment default, which was the default I selected when setting up this project. But I can always change it to a different warehouse or even parameterize it by using a variable. The types of commands supported are any that's supported by the auto warehouse command. So you have the option to suspend, resume a warehouse. In this case, I'm using a set command. And for the properties for the set, I want to up the size of my warehouse to large, but I can change any of the properties of the warehouse while I'm using this component. What that does is it creates the SQL that will execute against that warehouse to change its sizing. Next component on the canvas is one of the components as an example, which can control structures on the Snowflake side through Matillion. It's the create table component. As the name suggests, you can you're creating a table using this component. You do have the option to create if not exists, or replace. Once I select the replace option in this case, I point it to the database and schema on Snowflake. Now, for this particular use case, I've just used environment defaults, but I can choose a different database or even parameterize it. Same thing for the schema. Now, one thing to note with Matillion, any of these properties that you'll be seeing on in today's demo can be parameterized. What that does is gives you the benefit of being able to create jobs using variables or parameterizing it so that you can iterate over those by passing in different values. So it really makes that, gives you the flexibility to make the code reusable. With the table name, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm referencing a variable that I've set as a job variable and referencing that for that table name property. That job variable has been created at the job level, and I have a default value for it, which will be used for that component. Columns, I can use the wizard that shows up for entering my column information. I can keep using this plus sign, add in the column metadata. I can use text mode, which would be a tab delimited list of the column names. I can also use a grid variable, which would, a grid variable is an array style variable in Matillion. So you can use that to pass in this information as well. If there is keys, you can define those. And what that converts it to is, again, a SQL command. So this is a DDL statement that gets created and gets executed when this component runs. The next section, the next block, or the next three components are our extract and load components. So these are the different connector examples of some of the connectors available in Matillion. First one is to load some flights data that's already in file format in an S3 bucket. So I use the S3 load component to point to my S3 bucket, give it the search criteria, and point it to the database, warehouse, and schema I want to use to load into on the Snowflake side. Again, I'm using that variable to define that table name. The types of files supported with this S3 load component are all of these. So most commonly used file types will be covered by this component. If there is compression, you can define that. There is some properties for delimiters, formats, etc. All of these properties feed into creating a copy into command, which is the best practice of loading data to Snowflake. So we leverage that copy into whenever we can during this load process. Next is an RDS query component at the bottom of the screen. My plains reference data is in a MySQL database in an RDS, in the RDS service of Amazon. Hence, obviously, the RDS query component. I do also have the option of selecting or using a database query component for the same. In fact, database query can connect to any database that has a JDBC type 4 driver. Both of these components work in a similar way, just that RDS is specific to RDS databases. So let's take a look at this RDS query component. So with this RDS query, it gives you the option to select the database type, point it to the RDS endpoint, select the database, and pass in the credentials. With either of these components, the database query or the RDS query, you have the option to use basic mode, which would just give you a list of tables, reading the metadata tables on the source side. With advanced mode, you can type in a select statement, which gives you the ability to parameterize this select. As I said earlier, most of the properties can be parameterized. They can be partially parameterized too. So you get the option to maybe parameterize to the table name, or if you want to add a where clause with parameters, you get the option to do that. Next, I pointed to the target I want to load into, which is on Snowflake. So default database warehouse schema, and the table I'm loading this data into. There is a staging property that we leverage for these loads. Right now, it's set to Snowflake managed, but you have the option to choose any of the 4 options. So the 3 cloud storages along with Snowflake managed. How is that staging used? So let me elaborate how this load process works. When you run this component, it is going to run the select statement against your source database. It's going to stream the data that's selected to create temporary files on staging, and then leverage that copy into command for using that best practice of bulk loading data to Snowflake. So really makes that process efficient. From a customer standpoint, you just set the select query and the staging and the target, and you don't have to worry about what files get created or how it's going to maintain the names of the files to be used in the copy command. The component does that for you, so makes that job easier while developing and loading data. For out-of-the-box connectors, we have about 100+ connectors for various different applications, as you can see in this list right here in the components section. You can see a few for Dynamics, there's a few for Google-based applications, there is some social media applications, and the list goes on. One of the examples of those connectors is the Salesforce query component, which I have on the canvas. Salesforce, depending on the application you're connecting to, you may have different authentication methods supported in a specific component. With Salesforce, you get the option to use OAuth as your authentication or an username password. In this case, I've selected OAuth. With any component that has an OAuth, there's obviously a one-time setup where you would create the OAuth on the Matillion side and authorize it against the remote application, just so that both the application and Matillion are aware what that connection authorization is. Once that's set up, though, the very first time, you can select it from a dropdown. And once that authentication is good to go for the data sources, the beauty of having that out-of-the-box connector is you get a list of all the data sources available to you. You don't have to keep wondering what's available, try to figure out what kind of data set you can or cannot get. So with the data source, if I select account, then it gives me the data selection, which would just be a list of columns to select from. This again is determined for you. These would have been response in a JSON attribute format. Because there is an out-of-the-box connector, it's flattening out that information for you. You can add data source filters to this, you can add limits to this, and then point it to the target warehouse, database schema on Snowflake, and the table you want to load into. Again, with this component, you are referencing a staging environment. which could be Snowflake managed or the 3 different storages, because it's going to stream that data, create those temporary files, and then use the copy into to load that data. All right, so we went through the 3 load components. The next component on the canvas is the AND component, which gives you the ability to control the, excuse me, something in my throat. The wait component is one of those flow control components. So this lets you tell the job to wait for the 3 different components to finish before running the next transformation. Now, this is nested call to the transformation, so let me double click on this to open it. All right, so now we loaded that data, the flights data and the planes data. So let's look at this transformation where I'm going to work with those data sets. I am going to use that flights data set. I'm going to use an additional data set that's been already loaded in that raw format, which is my airports data. And my goal with this transformation is to join those 2 data sets and create an aggregate structure. While doing this, as I said earlier, we are using pushdown SQL. What that means is we will be using the UI-based approach, but we will be creating SQL in the background. So first up, I need to select my data set from from my raw data tables in Snowflake. So I am using one of the read components. Now, if you notice, this components menu completely changed. It is now components relevant to a transformation job. So with the first component, I'm using the table input component, which lets me point to my database and schema on Snowflake and specify the table I want to read that data from. In this case, I'm reading data from a variable which is pointing to the flights table. Columns, I can pick and choose columns or just select all the columns if I need to, which I've done here. This converts it to a SQL, which I can look at in the SQL tab. So on the SQL tab, it shows me all the different columns that I selected along with the table name I selected it from. The sample tab in the transformation is a really powerful feature to leverage while developing, because you can look at the data as you're working with it for creating this transformation. What this does is, if you're not aware of that data set, you get a visual into it. If you are aware of the data set, it makes sure as you're developing and as you're changing that data set, you are able to validate if your transformation is working as expected, or if you set the components properties to do what you are expecting it to do. You can also get a row count right here, which shows me right now with the first component, I'm starting off with about 56.4 million rows. Next component on the canvas is a filter component, which lets me add filter conditions to the SQL. I've added 2 different conditions here that converts it. If I go to the SQL tab, it adds a where clause to the SQL. I can check the box to expand references to see the full SQL that has been created so far. So each component is creating pieces to add to the SQL from the prior component. Let's sample this to see the row count. I didn't change a data set. I did filter it though, and it shows me I can validate that my row count went down by about 1.1 million to 55.3. So if it's not something that's expected, I can always go back, check the properties, change them, and validate that again. So it really gives you the ability to do so on the fly as you're developing, which saves time to have to complete development of the job, run that job, try to figure out the data discrepancies, and then come back and debug a job. So this, you're doing it while developing, really speeds up the development process. Next, I have the join component. And what I want to do is join this flights data to my airports reference data. Before I can do that, I need to select my airports data. So I'm pointing my table input, this second one, to an airports table. And if I look at the SQL, it has just 1 column. If I sample this, we'll get to see that this data set is actually a variant column, and it has JSON data sets. JSON rows. Now, we cannot join a JSON directly to a flattened tabular formatted flights table. So we need to flatten this out before we can send it to the join component. So we have components that are pre-built based on the functionality of the cloud data platform. In this case, to flatten JSON, we have a flatten variant component. With this component in the column mappings, I can specify what source column to look at, what property out of the JSON to extract or parse out, and the data type for the target column, as well as the alias for the target column. What that lets me do is create SQL on the fly of how to flatten that information. If I sample this, it will have flattened that JSON that we had into a tabular format. So makes it easy to work with JSON. Now, Snowflake inherently has functions that are available to work effectively with JSON or their variant format. That's exactly what we are using, but we are creating a custom component to make that even easier. In fact, we have one more component to do this, and it's called the extract nested data. With the extract nested data, it becomes even easier. So if I just connect my airports JSON to extract nested data, in the data structure, I get the ability to autofill this information. Once I click on it, it scans the data set. It gives me what's available as far as elements go to get from that data set. Once I click OK, it will validate it and create the SQL to parse out that information. Along with that, if I sample, it's going to show me that flattened format from that data set. So it literally took me half a minute to use that extract nested data to automatically figure out what's available and flatten it out. So there is other components like this which I'll point out, like for example pivot. There's the rank component which basically uses the rank functions. There's a Windows calculation component, which again use those Windows functions. So makes it easier for customers to work with Snowflake, but giving them the ability to use an UI-based approach. All right, so I am going to now take the output of that flattened variant component, which is the flattened data for airports, and pass it on to the join component. So with the join component now, I have selected filter remove cancel as my main stream of data, main table, given it an alias of F. In the joins, I select flatten variant as my join component, give it an alias of A, and select the type of join from the dropdown. I have selected inner join in this case. For the join expressions, I'm doing a simple f.origin, which is the origin airport, to a.iata, which is the IATA code for the airport. But I can build more complex expressions using all the different categories of native Snowflake functions that you get available on this window. If you click on a function, you also get the syntax as well as the full documentation. Now, being an UI-based intuitive product, we have a lot of customers where analysts use the tool. So this kind of information or reference material makes it easier for somebody who's not proficient with SQL or maybe new to the cloud data platform to look at the reference material, check out the documentation, and ramp up quicker. If there is user-defined functions that you want to use for creating your expression, you can use those as well. Last is the output columns. You can choose what columns from the two tables you want in the output. So you can restrict that output column list. This will convert the SQL and add an inner join from flights to planes to that SQL from the prior component. If I sample this now, it will show me the join happen, and I should be able to see that data set for the airports in the based on what I've selected for the output column. So I see the departure ITA, I see the departure city, departure state, which is all information from the airports table. Next up, I have a calculator component. Calculator component, the window looks very similar to that join expressions window. It gives you the opportunity to either overwrite an existing column or create a new column by defining expressions to calculate it. In this case, I have the departure delay column, which is a varchar. So I'm going to override that column with an expression that handles nulls and empties and sets the value to a 0, as well as converts the data type to a number. I also have a departure date column, which is using a native function of Snowflake to get the departure date. This, again, will have all the native functions handy to use for creating those expressions. If I sample this now, I should be able to see the dates that are available and the conversion I did for the or the calculation I did for departure date, as well as the conversion I did for departure delay. Next component is an aggregate, which lets me aggregate by the grouping columns, which I select. So I've selected 3 different columns for groupings. Aggregations, you can select the aggregation types that you need or what you want to do for a certain column. For year, I'm doing a count. For departure delay, I'm just going to calculate the average. That adds the group by to the SQL. And if I sample this, this is going to look completely different than what we had before. So this is going to show me that aggregation has been completed, year, month, departure, report with the grouping columns, and it then shows me the count for the year and the average departure delays. Last but not the least is one of the write components. It lets me, I'm using the rewrite table component, which lets me rewrite the target table every time this job executes. You do have other write components. Table output lets you truncate and load or append to an existing table. Table update lets you do a merge functionality. So basically, you can specify the matching keys, the columns you want to use for the match keys. You can do an operation, for example, an update or a delete on the match, and you can choose to do an operation on a no match. All right, so that was processing data. The final SQL on the write component is what gets used to run this job, and that SQL will be executed on Snowflake, so data does not have to leave the cloud data platform for that transformation. All right, so we looked at creating jobs. How about running them? So for running jobs, you have a few different options. Ad hoc, you can right-click on the canvas for the job you're in, or you can right-click on the job from the Jobs Explorer and say Run Job. It will trigger that Matillion workflow. There is an inbuilt scheduler in Matillion, which you can use to create a schedule for specific jobs. So it's a cron-like scheduler. You can name the schedule, you can enable or disable it. You can specify the time zone and the days of the week or days of the month and the job you want to run at that time. Matillion can also listen on a queue configuration, SQS in AWS, Azure Queue Storage in Azure, and GCP PubSub in GCP. How that works is you can enable the listen option for a particular queue, and there is a certain format of a message that's expected to be on the queue, which has the project name, job name listed in it. And if Matillion is listening on that queue, it's going to trigger that Matillion workflow. This is most commonly used for event-based triggering of Matillion jobs. One example is if you have a Lambda function that's watching a file being dropped on an S3 bucket and you want to trigger a Matillion workflow when that file arrives, you can set it up to have that Lambda function post a message in SQS with the job name that you want to trigger so that Matillion can listen on it and trigger that workflow. There is also a Matillion API layer that has a whole wide array of endpoints. Some of the endpoints are to export, import jobs, schedules, so on. One of the endpoints is to trigger a Matillion workflow. So if customers that are customers that use an enterprise scheduler, they usually use the API layer to trigger workflows because they can easily build a curl command, use it in that enterprise scheduler to trigger that Matillion job. All right, so that was part of how you can run job. Let's talk about how you can monitor them. So for a monitoring standpoint, when you're on the UI and you run a job, you can see the job run in the tasks menu. You also have the option to go to project task history to see all the jobs that have run. You can drill down into each job run by double-clicking on it and expanding that the top-level arrow so that you can see the granular level details of each of the jobs. This task history, you can also get outside of Matillion because there is a Matillion API endpoint that you can leverage to get that information. One thing I forgot to mention during orchestrations is for connectors that is not an out-of-the-box connector, we do have generic components like API extract and API query, which can be used to extract data from any RESTful API. So I've seen customers use the Matillion API layer in that extract query to get that information and actually maintain that task history in Snowflake. So that's an option as well. Let's talk about error handling. Now we ran jobs, we are monitoring it. How do you get those notifications? So a couple of options there. You can build the notification process within your jobs. Each orchestration component has the ability to have the next component connected using a success connector, a failure connector, or an unconditional connector. You have ability to use some of the components based on how you want to get that notification. So you could have a CloudWatch publish, you could have an SNS to send out a message, or you can also post to an SQS. We also do have an email, a send email component, which you can leverage to send out those notifications. The other option for especially error notifications is the manage error reporting through the project menu. This enables the reporting at the project level. So you get the ability to either enable it for manual runs and or scheduled runs. The way it works is you will post that notification to a webhook URL. You control what message gets posted. You can create your own payload based on either any of these inbuilt variables within Matillion, like job name, job ID, so that you have the metadata information for the error. Most messenger services allow you to create a webhook URL such that it can post a message to a certain channel, certain team group, whatever that looks like. So very commonly used feature just to have that notification process set up. All right, so now let's talk about a few other features within Matillion. With Enterprise Edition of Matillion, you have the option to integrate with Git. You can create your local repository, which then can connect to your remote repository that is based on Git. So any vendor that provides a Git remote repository. What that allows you to do is be able to create branches, manage your branching, merging, push, fetch, all through the Matillion UI. So it makes it easier to have your code repository in a remote repo right through the UI. There is Matillion endpoints for some of the operations like SCM fetch. There is a endpoint for switching commit levels to a different commit. So you have that ability as well as you're building your CI/CD pipelines. Another pretty cool feature in Matillion is our documentation feature. This is available in the advanced edition. So if I right-click on a job, I'll use the transformation job as an example and say generate job documentation. It lets me it creates an HTML file, which if I open, it starts off at the screenshot of the high-level flow of the job, but then goes into details of each component and how that component has been configured to give me that documentation immediately. This makes it quick and easy to create documentation for either handoffs between teams or just to have that document repository created. Concurrent connections, we looked at those earlier. That feeds into the parallelism and concurrency of using Matillion. So if I go to edit environment, I have this concurrent connections, which the tooltip, as the tooltip says, it's a number of concurrent connections per running job. So when I run a certain job, if I have certain components that can run in parallel as per the setup of the job, each component in this case can open a session to Snowflake to be able to run those loads parallelly. That really increases the ability to run parallelism in Matillion, giving you much more efficient load processes to get that data loaded and transformed quicker. For permissions, we do have granular permissions available. So if I go to a certain group, I can define very granular permissions of who can do what within the tool. For example, for OAuth, who can create an OAuth, who can delete an OAuth. You can set these permissions for the group and then organize your users in those certain groups so that some people may have access to do create OAuth, some may not. You are able to control that through your user configuration. All right, so that's all I had for the demo. So let's go back to the slides. Just to summarize, we have 3 different editions of Matillion, and you'll see that on the pricing page. We have basic, advanced, and enterprise. In the advanced edition and enterprise edition, you see some of the features that you get on top of the basic edition. We spoke about concurrent connections and auto-generated documentation, which is available in the advanced edition. You also have Git integration available in the enterprise edition. There is HA clustering option available as well with enterprise, which lets you create a DR setup. It essentially is 2 different instances connected to a same code repository for Matillion, such that if one zone goes down, you still have the DR going into the other node where it can pick up the jobs where the first node failed. All right, questions, anyone? Happy to answer any questions that come up.
Excellent. So before we get to those, and we have a few, I wanted to talk a little bit about that last slide, and in particular about ETL strategy. So you have 3 solutions, and obviously they're designed for different types of organizations, different types of people within organizations. Tell me a little bit about how companies thinking about a new ETL approach should be thinking about their strategy in particular.
Sure. So the first thing to mention there is, like, Matillion ETL makes it easier to get going when they commit to a cloud data platform, right? Whatever that cloud data platform is, the products of Matillion, if we have a product for that particular platform, as you saw, it's a UI-based approach to get your legacy data, get data from all your different applications into that cloud data platform. That really accelerates the growth of their cloud usage because they are able to get that data moved and transformed quicker while keeping it simple to read all of those processes and simple to maintain those processes.
Excellent. And so where are you finding traction? I know you guys are growing rapidly. I think that since the last time we spoke, you've doubled in size in terms of employee count anyway. Things are clearly going well. And obviously you're in an amazing space, as we know. Where are you finding traction these days? Is it in verticals? Is it across company size? Is it because of, the macro economic issues like the pandemic? I mean, what are you finding kind of as people think about a Matillion solution?
So one thing I would say is the solution itself, the data space itself, for us, we've noticed that it's industry agnostic. We have large financial institutions, we have small nonprofits that use our product. The beauty of being cloud native and having that cloud native pricing of subscription-based model is that if a small company wants to use a certain amount of Matillion, they have the ability to do so, as well as bigger organizations have the ability to invest more and run more instances of Matillion. From a security standpoint, the deployment model of being able to have that instant control by a customer's VPC and customer security policies, again, makes it agnostic because somebody who has a financial PII data can implement their security policies for that instance, versus if a nonprofit where there's no PII they can have a slightly looser policies that they get applied to the instance, right? So really industry agnostic. The most push I've seen or the most benefit I've seen during the pandemic is with everybody going remote, sometimes the challenge is to be able to access these software tools. Being cloud native, not having an IDE to be installed, it in fact makes it easier. And people working remote, they want to collaborate. They want to have that data integration. So tools like this, where they can bring in that data into that one source of truth in that one cloud data platform, really expedites the time to value to get those business decisions out.
So does Matillion include collaboration tools that remote teams can leverage in order to share workflows?
The Matillion, the UI is still pointing to that EC2 instance. So if multiple people are working in the tool, they do see those changes real time. So from a collaboration standpoint, we have Git functionality, as I showed you, which lets you collaborate, which lets you create multiple developer branches, and then have the policy of merging those to be able to collaborate in your development process. You can use the Matillion API layer to build your CI/CD pipelines, which then makes it easier for managing your progression to your QA environments, to your production environments.
We do have a question from the audience regarding, I think you touched on it, the Matillion Exchange. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So Matillion Exchange, in fact, we have, let me share my screen again. I'll just show you the page real quick.
Yeah.
It's actually in our communities page. It has the Exchange, which is this place where people can submit their shared jobs. Now, shared jobs is a concept I didn't cover during the demo. It's a way to create an orchestration, parameterize it, and package it as if it was a component so that it makes it reusable. The Matillion ETL community and the Matillion Exchange, the Exchange is specifically the place where customers can share their shared jobs into a common space where other customers maybe benefit from it if they have the need to use it. Now, on this page, the Exchange is right here, but we also do have forums, which is, again, a user community contributing, helping each other to ramp up to the tool, answering questions that they've faced or challenges they have faced, and sharing their experience. Documentation is pretty evolved. We have the Matillion documentation site. Matillion Academy is a really good resource for somebody who's new to Matillion. We have courses that customers can take for that understanding, that basic level understanding of Matillion, of the different components, the processes that are involved with development in Matillion. There's also the ideas portal. Now, this is closely monitored by our product team. This is when a customer is using Matillion. They think of an idea that may not be already incorporated. I think we briefly spoke about this in our last session too. Yep. It's closely monitored, and almost in every release there is a feature or two that have come from the ideas portal because a customer is requesting it.
I love this.
And customers are upvoting it.
That's great, and I think really that speaks to the spirit of where we're heading in Web 2.0 and into Web 3.0. This whole idea of sharing actual work,
right,
and being able to learn from it, and I think that's huge. What else do you have?
There is a user groups, which again is a open discussion forum. Support. Matillion comes with free support when customers start using the product, and request a demo, which is self-explanatory. So covers a wide variety of topics, from customer interaction with other customers, along with feature requests, so on. So really a wide array of resources to be used as customers use Matillion.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me a little bit about how folks should be thinking about their internal environment as they prepare to connect with you and discuss how Matillion might be able to provide some value.
So being a cloud native tool, the first decision point is what cloud data platform the customer wants to choose. Once they have that, Matillion can help you integrate data into that cloud data platform. We use pushdown SQL, meaning we can keep the Matillion instance live, but we give you the robust ability of working with that cloud data platform. The benefit is we have close relations with all of our cloud data platform vendors, where if they are releasing a new feature, we are on top of it, we know of it beforehand, and we are ready to release it as soon as they are on the day of or close behind to get that feature incorporated in the product. What that guarantees customers is the ability to use all the different functionality from the data platform while using Matillion. You don't lose any functionality by using Matillion. And the UI-based approach, I know I'm repeating myself, but the UI-based approach just makes it easier to first create jobs, second hand off and maintain jobs, and then if with new joiners, read those jobs, and also to ramp up to the tool as new people come on. So makes that journey easier to get to some value out of that cloud data platform.
So let me ask you the most obvious question is, how long does it take? How do folks begin to connect? What can they expect as they connect with your organization in talking about a solution and ultimately an implementation? And what are they looking at for timelines? And what do they need to be bringing to the table in terms of their knowledge of their organization's, data structures and so forth?
I think to answer the first question, while launching Matillion ETL, it takes 15 minutes to launch an instance. If they have a cloud data platform and they want to launch Matillion ETL, it's literally 15 to 20 minutes. Once that's up, the knowledge of what different data sources they want to connect to really helps expedite that process for customers. Most customers I work with have a set of use cases for their POC when they're trying Matillion, so that they for themselves can prove that Matillion works for them and does provide them that value. And if it works for them, if they immediately see that value come through, and they can expand those use cases to get more data in. So first is commitment to that cloud journey and that cloud data platform, and the which Matillion makes easier.
So before we let you go, I'm curious about what clearly you've seen a lot in the last year since we last talked. What do you see happening over the next year before we talk again?
So we just at reInvent, we announced some new products in the data space. We have a new product coming out for a CDC functionality, which will be live around Q2 next year. So exciting things coming up, exciting products coming up. These are all driven by what we have seen from a demand standpoint from customers. So I'm excited where the company is going with enhancing and adding new products to the product suite. So more to come. This is exciting times at Matillion for sure.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for this presentation. It was comprehensive. You covered a lot of topics that I think people were interested in. And we appreciate the time, and best of luck over the next year, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
You bet. Well, there you have it. Another data demo day in the books. We want to thank those three solutions for their fine presentations, and thank you for your attention. I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.